Chapter 980. That night, under the cover of the night, Jiang Hai took this huge tuna and drove to the dock of his fishery. Jiang Hai was sitting in the cabin, looking at the data in his hand with the help of the light. 87 meters long, 692 kilograms, a new world record. Looking at the data in his hand, Jiang Hai's eyes became brighter and brighter. After catching the tuna in the afternoon, Edward Anderson measured it and then loaded it into Jiang Hai's cabin. They recaught a great white shark before returning. Now Jiang Hai has two navies. One is Big Fool leading his wife, plus 13 adult dolphins, and the other is these 10 great white sharks. Jiang Hai named them White 1 to White 10 according to the order catching them. Now, these guys have also gathered and began to patrol the fishery. Jiang Hai believes that as long as there is time, the growth rate of these 10 great white sharks will be amazing. As long as they grow up to 8 or 9 meters in length, Jiang Hai will not be afraid of anything in the future. The killer whale from last time? If they dare to come again, Jiang Hai dares to not let any of them run away. 10 great white sharks is a fixed task, and now is successfully completed, and the bluefin tuna is an out-and-out gift. But now this gift, Jiang Hai has to study how to sell it. With such a big tuna, Jiang Hai can't eat it, so he can only sell it. But there's a problem. Bluefin tuna is now banned in North America. He can't sell it openly, but he can sell it to the black market. First, he doesn't want to be involved with the dark world. Second, he can't sell it at a high price, so he still has some hesitation. But when he came back, he already thought about it. Since he can't sell it at a high price, he can use Prawalton to sell it. Of course, he and Prawalton are not using these two unpleasant words, but she can really help him. Jiang Hai made up his mind. He was going to wait for his fish to go into the freezer and call Prawalton. After a few hours of turbulence, Jiang Hai's boat arrived at his dock at about 9 o'clock in the evening. After arriving at the dock, there was no welcoming ceremony or many people. There were only two people here. One was Robbins Garcia, and the other was Philemon Turner. There were not even fishermen. This also showed the extent of Jiang Hai's trust. After the two helped Jiang Hai carry the fish off the boat, they covered it with a layer of black cloth and put it on the F-750. Then they drove Jiang Hai and the others back to Jiang Hai's mansion. At this time, no one was sleeping in Jiang Hai's mansion. When they saw Jiang Hai and the others carrying the big fish, they were stunned. This is a big guy. After putting it in the freezer, which specializes in freezing high-quality seafood, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. On the spot, Jiang Hai gave Edward Anderson and the others a bonus. As he said, each of them would get $10,000. But because they caught the big guy, the original $10,000 was tripled. Jiang Hai gave each of them a bonus of $40,000. As for Robbins Garcia and Philemon Turner, they were given $5,000 each. After all, they only drove the car. This was also considered as hush money. These people naturally had nothing to say about the money Jiang Hai gave them. Naturally, they would accept the money given to them by Jiang Hai. After receiving the money, these people went back to sleep. Jiang Hai took out his phone and called Prawalton. "Hey, Humph, be gentle, you little SH, put your tongue in." The phone rang a few times before Prawalton picked it up. However, as soon as he picked up, the voice on the other side made Jiang Hai feel a little embarrassed. Needless to say, she should be doing something shameful with her girls. "Hey, I'm not bothering you, am I?" Listening to the voice on the phone, Jiang Hai asked awkwardly. "Of course I'm bothering you, but it's you. It doesn't matter. Tell me, why are you calling me? Do you miss me?" Let me tell you, I recently found a few young models from Southeast Asia. That feeling, TSK, I'm saving the first time for you. If you have time, you can come and experience it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton was not shy at all. Instead, she said boldly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was sweating. This topic is really not easy to answer. I definitely miss you, but I just came back a few days ago. Naturally, I have to spend some time with my girlfriends. But if you have time, can you come to me tomorrow? Listening to the voice of Prawalton over there, Jiang Hai said a little embarrassedly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also smiled. "Okay, no problem. But can you tell me in advance, why are you looking for me? I could be prepared. Hearing that Jiang Hai was looking for her, Prawalton also asked with a smile. I caught a fish, a very big tuna. It's not good to say it on the phone, so Jiang Hai said it vaguely, but Prawalton understood when she heard it and then responded on the other side of the phone. Oh, I'm just waiting for her to come tomorrow. Just a phone call made me feel a little excited. Hanging up the phone, Jiang Hai imagined the scene at Prawalton's place and couldn't help but shake his head. This woman is not easy to deal with. Go to sleep. I haven't tasted meat for several days. Indeed, Jiang Hai had been staying in the hotel for the past few days and didn't do anything else. Now that he was back, he naturally had to do something. Putting away the phone, Jiang Hai returned to the hall, but after coming back, he found that only Delina, Marion, and Tarago were here, and the others were not there. Needless to say, they are preparing a surprise for him. Since the end of the bathroom that day, they have prepared a lot of surprises for Jiang Hai, and Jiang Hai also found that he seems to have changed a little. He actually likes this thing very much. Now, when he heard that they are preparing again, Jiang Hai also walked into his room eagerly. As soon as he pushed the door and walked in, he was instantly greeted by a scene of beautiful women in front of Jiang Hai. Why use this word? It is mainly because the atmosphere in the room really has a feeling of spring. At this time, in the room, Jiang Hai's girls were changing their clothes. Of course, some have already finished changing, such as Feng Yinxun and Ai Xiaoxi. After all, they have worn it before, so they changed very quickly. Some people are changing, such as Qi Jia, Qia, Aphrodite, and others, and some people have not changed yet. At this time, they are standing there naked, thinking about how to wear the clothes. Today, the theme prepared by Feng Yinxun and the others should be Huaxiao elements, because at this time, they're all wearing cheongsams, but not the kind of cheongsams with high slit, but the kind of cheongsams that are very short. The bottom of the cheongsams is even just above the thighs. When they move, the front and back curtains will move back and forth, and the scenery below is clearly visible. And because the cheongsams themselves are not made according to their figures, so there are big and small cheongsams, and they look more strange and beautiful. Oh, what are you doing? We're not done changing yet. Seeing Jiang Hai walking like this, Qi Jia immediately pulled down the clothes that were half put on, and then said to Jiang Hai with a look of displeasure. But hearing her words, Jiang Hai took the initiative to move closer. We are already an old couple. What is there to be embarrassed about? Come, let me take a good look. Jiang Hai came to Qi Jia's side, hugged her in his arms, and said with a smile. Hearing Jiang Hai's words and Jiang Hai's breath, Qi Jia was a little overwhelmed in an instant, but now she can't push him away, nor can she not push him away. After all, they're dressed like this to seduce Jiang Hai. Now that Jiang Hai has fallen into the trap, she naturally has to half push and half accept. Just as she was struggling there, Jiang Hai had already picked her up. Sometimes, the communication between a man and a woman doesn't need too many words. Just like Jiang Hai, it is better to directly express with actions. Isn't it better? She patted Jiang Hai's chest coquettishly, and she let Jiang Hai do whatever he wants. This night is naturally a spring breeze. Although Jiang Hai can achieve balance, it is not a problem to share the rain and dew. Everyone was busy from 9 o'clock in the evening to the next day. At dawn, they officially fell asleep and slept until noon. If it weren't for Prawalton's arrival, Jiang Hai and the others might still be asleep. After a simple wash, Qia began to command everyone to cook, and Jiang Hai yawned and looked at Prawalton, who was sitting on the sofa with a smile. I'm a little envious of you. TSK, TSK. Look at these girls on your side. When I first saw them, although they were beautiful, they were not as beautiful as they are now. Look, it is really good for a woman's beauty to be watered by you every day. Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai shrugged. No one will say anything if you want to live here. Looking at Prawalton, Jiang Hai said calmly. That's right. No one will say anything if I move in, but if I bring a dozen girls with me, they will probably cut me into pieces. You little heartless girl. If you have time, remember to visit me more often. By the way, what's your purpose for calling me here? Smiling and patting Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a smile, but soon turned to the main topic. Come here. Jiang Hai also asked her to come here for a purpose. Without saying anything, he led her to the cold storage. Chapter 981. After the two joked for a while, Jiang Hai took Prawalton to the direction of the cold storage. Jiang Hai's house was very big, really big, including the cold storage below. The cold storage was divided into 5 rooms, each with different functions. The temperature was 5 degrees above zero, -7 degrees below zero, -15 degrees below zero, -30 degrees below zero, -30 degrees below zero, plus nitrogen. These 5 rooms had different temperatures, so they handled different things. For example, the 5 degrees below zero were for vegetables and fruits that were in season. Jiang Hai's manor had a vegetable greenhouse with many fruit trees, such as blueberries, cherries, and big cherries in the United States. These things were now also available in China, but the price was slightly higher. In the United States, these things were not very expensive. There was also cranberry, a small round fruit with bright red skin that grew on low vines. This thing was more of a dried fruit in China, but there were many in the north of the United States. It mainly grew in the swamps and wetlands of North America. It was said that the total planted area in the world was less than 40,000 acres. No one knew whether this was the case or not. In addition, there was also snake fruit, which was a kind of red and special apple. Of course, there were also grapes, but this thing was a matter of season. After these vegetables and fruits were ripe or not eaten, Jiang Hai would put them in the 5 degrees below zero warehouse, which could be stored for a few days. The 0 degrees below zero was the freezer. For example, some lobsters, abalones, and so on. This warehouse was basically a warehouse for precious seafood. There were many water tanks in this warehouse. Because the temperature was kept at 0 degrees, the water would not freeze, but it could also keep these seafood in a fresh state to the maximum extent. The -7 degrees below zero was for beef. Good beef needed to be eaten to get rid of the sourness. The -7 degrees below zero was just right, so it was specially for beef. The -15 degrees below zero was the freezer, just like the refrigerator at home. Any frozen chicken, frozen meat, and so on were all stored here. The -30 degrees below zero was the nitrogen freezer. Nitrogen was known to be able to cool down quickly. When it turned into a liquid, the temperature was nearly -200 degrees. Jiang Hai's place was naturally not -200 degrees. Basically, the role of nitrogen was to cool things down quickly. For example, some top-notch beef and seafood could only be frozen for about a week to 10 days, which meant that they had to be sold within a week to 10 days. If they couldn't be sold, the frozen meat would go bad. Of course, some people said that the frozen meat was actually frozen and melted, which was called frozen meat. This was a very common thing in China. In some supermarkets, if you saw some frozen beef, 90% of it had just melted, then it was called frozen. But in fact, this was a lie. The real chilled meat was really just killed and then wrapped in a layer of crisp ice to maintain the freshness of the meat itself. This was called chilled meat, and this room was specially used to preserve the high-grade products that couldn't be chilled. Freshly slaughtered beef or freshly caught fish, which probably could not be sold within 10 days, were directly sent here. With a spray of phlegm, the beef and fish would solidify instantly. It would take almost a few seconds for them to solidify. This way, the texture of the fish and beef would be preserved to the maximum extent. After they melted, although there was no way to sell them as frozen, they were still more valuable than frozen ones. When these 5 warehouses were built, Edward Anderson and Robbins Garcia presided over it. They thought so at the beginning, but basically, only the first 4 warehouses could be used now. Jiang Hai's beef and seafood were supplied all over the United States and even Europe. Of course, the royal family of Dubai was also included. His beef was only in short supply, but there was no time when it could not be sold out. Jiang Hai brought Prawalton to the freezer where the frozen food was stored. As the door of the freezer opened, the lights also lit up. Then, in front of Prawalton's eyes, a huge tuna appeared in front of her. Oh my God, this is a tuna? And it's a bluefin one. Oh my God, how big is this? Looking at the fish in front of her, Prawalton was a little incoherent. She looked at Jiang Hai in surprise and asked, "Body length, 487, weight, 692. Looking at Prawalton's appearance, Jiang Hai also smiled. He knew that this number was indeed amazing, a new global record, but he knew that this fish was just an ordinary bluefin in his manner. He remembered that he should have seen a bigger one when he was diving. Oh my God, this is really a big guy. Touching the fish's body, Prawalton also muttered in shock. She often dealt with these big guys, but to be honest, it was her first time seeing such a big one. What are you going to do? Patting the big fish's head, Prawalton looked at Jiang Hai. I have to ask you about this. It was caught yesterday. Today is the second day. Can Walmart buy it? Otherwise, what else can we do? Shrugging his shoulders, Jiang Hai really didn't know much about this. It was better to ask Prawalton. Walmart will definitely buy it, but to be honest, it's a waste to sell it to us. This fish can't be sold by the weight. It can only be sold as a whole. In the United States, this fish is probably only worth about $400,000. Shaking her head, Prawalton said directly. Hearing her offer, Jiang Hai also curled his lips. Although $400,000 for a fish is not a small amount, it is definitely not a lot. But if it goes to Japan, this fish can at least be sold for this amount, Prawalton said while making a two gesture. Seeing her gesture, Jiang Hai also raised his eyebrows. $2 million? That's not bad. Then what are we waiting for? We should send this thing to where it should go. In fact, in Jiang Hai's view, tuna is the same thing. To be honest, the taste is really the same. He is quite happy to use it to cheat money from Japan. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also smiled. I remember that you and I had discussed whether we could directly get a line to sell fish in Japan. I had already set up the line at that time. Now that we have this fish, I believe that our first shot will be very successful. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also smiled and said, then showed Jiang Hai her mobile phone. There's a list of plans in her mobile phone. When Jiang Hai participated in the fishery exhibition last year, a Japanese businessman bought 2 of Jiang Hai's fish, and the price was not low. At that time, Jiang Hai asked Prawalton because in his impression, this fish was really not worth so much money. But later, he learned that the price of this fish in the United States and Japan was different. After learning this news, Jiang Hai wanted to sell the fish directly to Japan, so he discussed it with Prawalton. Prawalton also said that she would try it. Unexpectedly, it was now useful. Prawalton, to be exact, the Walmart Group, had already set up a line in Japan, but unfortunately, they lost a lot of money before. Walmart actually entered the Japanese market in 2002. After all, the Japanese market was the second largest retail market in the world at that time. But after entering, they lost money for years, so they announced their withdrawal in 2005. Of course, the main reason was the withdrawal of their main business. It was impossible to withdraw all the money they invested there. At present, Walmart has more than 370 supermarkets in Japan. There are still supermarkets, but they are not as enthusiastic as before. Basically, they don't want you to make money, but you also don't want to lose money. At least, the brand of Walmart must remain in the hearts of the Japanese people. Last year, Prawalton took the initiative to ask about Walmart in Japan. Naturally, the senior management of Walmart also knew about it. Walmart's recent strategy was mainly to focus on Jiang Hai's beef and seafood. The expansion was quite good. Originally, only the northeast corner of the United States and some large cities sold Jiang Hai's beef. But now, some towns in the northeast corner of the United States are selling Walmart's beef. There are more big cities, including some big cities in the south. It can be said that Jiang Hai's beef had almost unified the high-end beef market in the U.S. Luckily, his beef was not the right product. At the same time, Walmart also made use of Jiang Hai's beef to attack other markets in Europe. Currently, Walmart supermarkets in the UK, France, Italy, and other countries also sell Jiang Hai's beef. The purchase rate is really good. Basically, after Walmart's beef is sold out in less than 2 days. The only country that is not interested in Jiang Hai's beef is Germany. This is because Germans like to eat pork. But in Asia, beef cannot enter the market. For example, beef cannot enter Japan. It is mainly because of the national pride of that country. They do not allow anyone to say that Shanghai's beef is better than theirs. Japanese beef is the best in the world. Shanghai's beef, they are not interested. All right, the South Koreans were the same. In their eyes, Hanyo was the best. There was no one else who could compare to him. As for why they cannot enter Huaxia, it is because Shanghai and Chile sell their steaks in Huaxia. Secondly, Huaxia has high import tariffs on U.S. beef. Huaxia is an independent country, and they will not allow U.S. products to be dumped there. Although Shanghai is a citizen of Huaxia and still has his Chinese citizenship, his beef is from the U.S. That's why Walmart supermarkets do not sell Shanghai's beef in Huaxia. If Fengyu wants to eat his beef, he can only go to Chile's 4 steakhouses. Having said that, America's low-grade and mid-grade beef could be imported into Japan. High-grade beef, like Shanghai's beef, was not allowed to be sold. But there might be a loophole for fish. Chapter 982. Jiang, in order to cooperate with your fish, we are going to hold an auction in the Tsukiji market. Your fish is the biggest advertisement. If you have time, you can go and have a look. After all, you also have to know how popular your fish is. As for your safety, you don't have to worry about it. I will also go. You can live with me. Looking at Shanghai, Prawalton said with a smile. To be honest, when she saw Shanghai, she also had some impulses in that aspect. It's just that in the face of business, that impulse has long been suppressed by her. In her opinion, if this fish is successfully caught, then she will be very excited. If at that time, Shanghai will accompany her. TSK. This, I have to study it. Hearing Shanghai's words, Prawalton pouted slightly. Then you have to think about it carefully. You know, we still need a few days to operate your fish, and we have to send it to the island without anyone knowing. This is not an easy task. Looking at Shanghai, Prawalton said. Hearing her words, Shanghai also took her out of the warehouse. In the afternoon, they naturally had a good meal at Shanghai's place. Prawalton didn't use it in the evening, but she called her men and was ready to take over the fish at any time. In the evening, after Shanghai and the others exercised, they hugged Chi Jie and thought about what Prawalton said. What's wrong? Still not sleeping? Aren't you tired? Chi Jie, who was lying in the crook of Shanghai's arm like a kitten, asked softly. She was the first one to do that, and now she had already woken up from her nap. Well, you sleep first. Looking at Chi Jie, Shanghai smiled at her, then gently patted her pink back and said to her. But after hearing Shanghai's words, Chi Jie didn't sleep. She propped up her body and looked at Shanghai. Say it, what do you want? You're a person who wears everything on your face. You don't have any shrewdness at all, but that's what I like about you. Looking at Shanghai, Chi Jie said with a smile. Oh, it's like this. Hearing Chi Jie's words, Shanghai sighed, and then told Chi Jie what he said to Prawalton today. Of course, he didn't say that Prawalton asked him to live with her. He just said that Prawalton wanted him to see it with his own eyes and examine the Japanese market, which is good for his future fishing business. Shanghai has a lot of fishing business in the United States and Europe, but fish is different from beef. Beef has a very clear grade. What kind of beef is sold at what price, this is fixed. But fish has no fixed price, only a fixed low price. Shanghai's fish is really good. Now the price is high, and people are rushing to buy it, but what will happen after a long time? What if Shanghai's supply is big? If they can't sell it in North America, they can send it to Europe. What if the Europeans don't recognize it? The domestic line is destined not to be too wide, because the domestic tax on Shanghai's fishing industry will be heavy. Take Shanghai's fish, for example. If he sold it at retail for $50 a kilo, which is 150 renminbi a kilo, the customs there would charge him 40%. Do you believe it? Therefore, when Shanghai sold fish, the quantity was very small. He takes the high-end route. The low-end Shanghai's money is not enough to pay the tax. If the tax is added to the fish, he will sell white pomfret for nearly 240 renminbi per kilogram. But Shanghai wants to ask, is there anyone in China who buys white pomfret for 240 renminbi per kilogram? Shanghai was also a very patriotic person in He Kingdom. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept his current nationality. Moreover, He helped Hay Kingdom to connect with Dufayman. But he couldn't possibly lose money. People are selfish. Jiang Hai doesn't know if he will take the money to support society when he is old, but at least not now. This is also the reason why it is difficult to see those high-end seafood in the restaurants of ordinary people. But the Japanese like to eat fish, and the fish they consume every year is far more than the people in their country. What's more, it is still very popular with tourists, such as sushi houses, which are really popular. Under such circumstances, only the Japanese can sell at a high price. Well, you go. After thinking for a while, Chi Jie said to Jiang Hai, Why didn't you stop me this time? Looking at Chi Jie, Jiang Hai looked at her with some doubts. It shouldn't be. Stopping you depends on the matter. You forgot that I always hope that you can be busy with your career. For example, the livestock exhibition industry in San Antonio is not that important. It's okay if you don't go, or let Robbins Garcia go, but now it's an expansion of overseas business. More or less, you have to go personally. Otherwise, how can you rest assured? Anyway, I'm worried about Prawalton. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Chi Jie rolled her eyes at him, and then said with some bitterness, Then let's go together. I just haven't been to Japan. Have you guys not been there? Hearing Chi Jie's words, Jiang Hai smiled a little awkwardly, and then nodded. Since she said she wanted to go, then everyone should go together. We don't want to go. We won't go. We know that those Japanese are quite unfriendly to you. After all, you've slapped their faces on the beef. If we go there, we'll probably bring you some trouble. If they kidnap us, we'll be in trouble. I don't trust Pra Walton's bodyguard. You'd better go with Azalina. If anything happens, it'll be easy for you to escape. Hearing Jiang Hai's proposal, to be honest, Chi Jie was indeed a little tempted, but soon she shook her head. A gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall. If it wasn't because Jiang Hai really wanted to see the market there with his own eyes, she estimated that Jiang Hai would not go. Just as she thought, Jiang Hai is a homebody. He really has no interest in Japan. What? He can go and see those teachers who taught him and experience the customs of Japan? Jiang Hai now has more than 20 girls around him, and all of them are quite obedient. They will do whatever he wants them to do. They will pose whatever he wants them to pose. Under such circumstances, is there a need to experience the customs of Japan? Jiang Hai is crazy. He is really not the hungry man now. He is now a full man. A full man? Well, he is indeed a little full. Therefore, Japan, for him, is really not that tempting. Okay, I will go early and come back early. Anyway, the auction will not take long. Hearing Chi Jie's words, Jiang Hai also nodded and said to her seriously. When Chi Jie heard Jiang Hai's words, she also hugged Jiang Hai and fell asleep. Jiang Hai took out his mobile phone and sent a message to Prawalton. He needs to let her handle this matter first. The next morning, when Jiang Hai woke up, Prawalton was already prepared. The procedures, the plane, the airport, the time of departure, everything has been arranged. They're just waiting for Jiang Hai to wake up and then go to get the fish. The next thing is very simple. It is not the first time Jiang Hai went out, so he is naturally familiar with it. Soon, Jiang Hai's people were set. Jiang Hai, Azalina, and Wallace Shelley, 3 people. The reason why it is so simple is that they are going to Japan. If the people of this country want to deal with Jiang Hai, it is useless to have more people. At that time, it will be troublesome. And these 3 people, it is very easy for any one of them to escape, especially Jiang Hai. It is very easy for him. He also believes in Azalina and Wallace Shelley's skills. The second reason is because they're only going for a few days. According to Prawalton, including today, they will only stay in Japan for a total of 4 days. The 4th night is the time of the auction. On the 4th night or the 5th day, they can come back. It is just that they are going for a few days, and Prawalton will definitely have a lot of bodyguards. After everything was booked, Jiang Hai and the others set off. They drove an F-750, which was responsible for transporting the fish. After the fish arrived at the airport, they handed it over to Pra Walton's people. Although the fish were chilled, Pra Walton's people used frozen bluefin tuna strips. This way, Jiang Hai's fishing time was vague. This was their way of doing things, and Jiang Hai couldn't learn it. After the fish got on the plane, Jiang Hai and the others also got on Prawalton's private jet. Well, to be exact, it should be the Walmart Group's private jet for Prawalton. This jet belongs to the family, but if Prawalton is still in power, the family will let her use it for free. This is also one of the high-level benefits. After getting on the plane, Jiang Hai can't help but exclaim, Chapter 983. However, although the color would make people complain, he had to admit that Prawalton's plane decoration was really like a bug. The plane was divided into two floors. The lower floor was the cargo hold, where Jiang Hai's fish was, and the upper floor was divided into four parts: rooms, lounge, hall, and entertainment room. Jiang Hai didn't go to other places because the hall was just inside. As soon as he walked into the hall, Jiang Hai couldn't help but give a middle finger in his heart. This hall was really quite unique. The sofas in the hall were fixed on the two sides and the back of the cabin. There was only one row. Of course, the sofas were the best sofas. You can lie down and turn around. Everything was electric. If you want to watch the clouds, you can watch the clouds. If you want to watch the front, you could do anything you want except for doing a handstand. In the middle of the hall, there was a projection TV. It was the kind that projected from the bottom to the top. It was an enlarged version of the 3D TV in Jiang Hai's house. As for the sides of the TV, there were 8 steel pipes. When Jiang Hai saw this thing, he looked at Prawalton. Prawalton smiled and winked. For her, when flying in the air, she naturally wanted to find some fun. After boarding the plane, before the plane took off, she took Jiang Hai and the others to have a look. It had to be admitted that Jiang Hai's plane could be considered as a commercial plane. After all, there were many people, and this plane was Prawalton's other house. The rooms behind the hall were not small, and each of them had a separate bathroom. In the lounge, there was a small swimming pool. Of course, when taking off and landing, the swimming pool would be covered by a glass plate. Otherwise, the plane would be flooded. In addition to the swimming pool, there were various fitness equipment, even yoga balls and indoor tennis. Almost everything that one could think of was available here. The entertainment room was similar to the hall, but it was smaller. It was suitable for people to play when there were fewer people. There was also a fixed wine cabinet. It seemed that Prawalton used to play with some beautiful girls and drink wine in the sky. This was really a holy place in high school. Hey, 2 ladies, do you mind watching some programs? After visiting various places, Prawalton took Jiang Hai and the others to sit on the sofa. When the plane took off, Prawalton smiled and asked Azalina and Wallace Shelley. Although she was also very interested in these 2 girls, they were Jiang Hai's people. She wouldn't take the initiative to take the initiative. Hearing her words, Azalina shrugged and said indifferently, "Whatever, this is your territory. Come on up, be more hospitable to our guests." Hearing Azalina's words, Prawalton also clapped his hands, and then 8 stewardesses came out from the cabin in the distance. Jiang Hai also saw these stewardesses when he boarded the plane, but at that time, they were still dressed very well. Although they were wearing stewardess uniforms now, except for the hats on their heads, they were basically changed. Their upper body was changed to one that exposed their navel, and, at the same time, the front was open to the V-neck, the bottom was changed to a small skirt, and the bottom was changed to a variety of silk stockings, white, black, transparent, and flesh-colored. After the 10 stewardesses came over, 8 of them stood in front of steel pipe. With the sound of music, the 3D TV also began to play some stimulating music, and these stewardesses also danced to the music. There were 2 stewardesses who were waitresses. One of them walked to Jiang Hai with a smile on her face. "Sir, what would you like to drink?" Looking at the stewardess in front of him, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and asked for beer. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the stewardess did not rush to leave, but said to Jiang Hai, "I suggest you try sake. It is also a specialty of our destination, Dongjing. It is indeed a pity if you don't try it." "I've drunk it, but I'm not used to the taste. I'll have beer." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the stewardess also smiled and went to the back. Not long after, she came back with a bottle of beer and took the initiative to open a bottle. Jiang Hai was just about to take it, but she suddenly sat in Jiang Hai's arms, and then took a sip in front of Jiang Hai, and then pouted at Jiang Hai. She wanted to give it to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai smiled and did not care. He directly grabbed the beer bottle and took a sip. Seeing that Jiang Hai did not kiss her, the stewardess also smiled. After swallowing the beer, she still did not stand up and sat on Jiang Hai's lap. I'm very curious. What is this gentleman's name? On this plane, to be exact, in this cabin, there has never been a man. Of course, the captain and co-captain are men, but they can't come in. Looking at Jiang Hai, the stewardess asked with a puzzled face. This is also one of the harem of Prawalton, but the restrictions are not as strict as in her home. She only asked that if the stewardess on the plane is not allowed to have a relationship with a man outside the contract period, or have a boyfriend. Of course, it does not mean that they will die of old age on the plane. If they have a boyfriend, they can apply. After receiving 1 year's salary, they can leave the flight team. Such a contract is very generous. Oh, my surname is Jiang. Hearing that he may be the first male guest on this plane, Jiang Hai is also very happy. He chuckled and introduced himself. But just when he finished, the stewardess already knew who this man is. The legendary Jiang Hai of Winthrop. Perhaps for others, they have heard of Jiang Hai, but not Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai is not that important to them. But for this woman, she is very clear about Jiang Hai. Because she knows that Jiang Hai is the male host of this plane. Many people know that Jiang Hai domineeringly said that Prawalton is his woman at the Walton cocktail party. Although there is no title, people who follow Prawalton know that Jiang Hai is very important to her. I didn't expect you to be Mr. Jiang. After knowing Jiang Hai's identity, the woman's body is closer to Jiang Hai, and her hands unconsciously increase the strength. Her pair of eyes looking at Jiang Hai are shining, and her well-developed breasts are directly pressed against Jiang Hai's chest. Feeling the elasticity, it should be real. Hey girls, work harder. This is the only man I allow you to have sex with during work. If you really feel uncomfortable, go to him. At this time, Prawalton came over with 2 stewardesses who were dancing just now. Obviously, she has been enjoying this for a long time. At this time, one of her hands reached into the top of the stewardess on the left, and the other hand into the skirt of the stewardess on the right. Needless to say, she knows what she is doing. Seeing that the stewardess is trembling when she walks, she walked in front of Jiang Hai, kicked the stewardess on Jiang Hai's body with her high-heeled foot, and then said loudly. When they heard that Jiang Hai is the only man they can touch, the 10 stewardesses' eyes lit up almost at the same time. After all, they haven't tasted meat for a long time. Prawalton recruited stewardesses. Unlike her followers, the requirements are C. She recruited stewardesses who are beautiful, have a good figure, and are loyal to the contract. She didn't care if they had a boyfriend before. Therefore, whenever these girls heard the word man, they would go crazy. Well, why are we still wasting time here? Hearing Prawalton's words, the girl sitting in Jiang Hai's arms sat up straight and then took off her coat. In an instant, 2 indescribable things jumped in front of Jiang Hai. At the same time, her 2 hands were constantly undoing Jiang Hai's pants. Maybe she felt that it was about time. The stewardess directly got on the horse, and the battle began. Hey, aren't you going to play? Looking at the fierce battle over there, Prawalton also sat next to Azalina, then opened her legs and sat down. Naturally, a stewardess came over to help her lick some indescribable places. We have fun every day, so we don't care about this time. Hearing her words, Azalina chuckled. What she said was also true. Since the last layer of relationship with Jiang Hai was broken, Azalina and Jiang Hai really spent a lot of time together. In addition, she was originally an agent, so her needs in that area were not too strong, so it was okay. As for Wallace Shelley, she was now in a state of work. She had to look up information. As for Jiang Hai, it didn't matter. Jiang Hai's body was so good, they had plenty of opportunities. Then in the next few days after arriving in Dongjing, I won't be polite. Hearing the words of these 2 girls, Prawalton also said with a smile. At the same time, her eyes also looked at Jiang Hai, revealing a hint of excitement. Chapter 984. Get up and wash up, we're almost there. Leaning against the door of the room, Prawalton said to Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also raised his head from a pile of pink arms and legs, then fell heavily on the pillow. You really didn't treat your employees well. They are too crazy. Looking at the ceiling, although he just slept, Jiang Hai still felt a little tired. He came to help Prawalton to comfort her employees. I'm quite good to them, but some things can't be replaced, don't you think? Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a chuckle, then walked out of the room. Jiang Hai also woke up the girls around him one by one, and then went into the bathroom to wash up. After 10 minutes, Jiang Hai came out very energized. Although he was still yawning, he had basically recovered. When he came out, the girls were gone. It seems that they have their own bathroom. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai stretched and walked out of the room. You're up. What do you want to eat? Walking into the hall, he saw that Prawalton, Azalina, and Wallace Shelley had been waiting here for a long time. Seeing Jiang Hai, Prawalton asked him, "Oh, anything is fine, a sandwich or noodles?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also nodded, then walked to the seat next to her and sat down. Prawalton had already clapped her hands and called a flight attendant who had just put on her clothes. Compared to their clothes just now, they have now changed back and became well-dressed. After all, they were about to land. Give him a bowl of ramen and a sandwich. Hearing Prawalton's order, the flight attendant also smiled and went to the back. Not long after, she came out with a plate with a large bowl of ramen and 4 cut sandwiches. Let me feed you. Putting the things in front of Jiang Hai, the flight attendant smiled and bent over, showing her surging upper body in front of Jiang Hai, and said softly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled awkwardly, then shook his head. Forget it, I'll eat this myself. Looking at Jiang Hai's embarrassed look, the flight attendant couldn't help but laugh. Will you take this flight when you go back? Looking at Jiang Hai eating noodles, the stewardess didn't care. She directly sat on the armrest of Jiang Hai's sofa. With a smile on her face, she looked at Jiang Hai, who was wolfing down the noodles, and asked, this? Hearing the flight attendant's words, it wasn't difficult for Jiang Hai. They didn't have enough time with him. He will also sit when he comes back. It's a benefit for you. But before Jiang Hai could speak, Prawalton over there agreed for him first. When she heard Prawalton's words, the flight attendant couldn't help but cheer in a low voice. What kind of clothes do you like or fancy? You tell me, I'll go and study it with them. Looking at Jiang Hai, the flight attendant said with her eyes shining. Hearing what the flight attendant said, Jiang Hai was embarrassed. What is this? Fortunately, the plane didn't fly slowly and finally let Jiang Hai get rid of the girl who wanted to communicate with Jiang Hai again. As the plane slowly landed, Jiang Hai and the others also arrived at Haneda International Airport in Tokyo. When the plane stabilized, the plane also connected to the covered bridge. Jiang Hai, Prawalton, Azalina, and Wallace Shelley also walked out of the special passage. But just out of the covered bridge, Jiang Hai saw more than a dozen bodyguards. There were black, white, and yellow people, wearing black suits and sunglasses, standing quietly on both sides of the passage. Needless to say, these people were here to protect Jiang Hai's safety. They should be Prawalton's people. Don't worry, I know there are a lot of people in Japan who want to cheat you. I have arranged everything. Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was still very calm. Soon, when Jiang Hai and the others walked out of the airport, the people in charge of cargo had already taken out Jiang Hai's fish and the things brought by Prawalton this time. This time, the things they brought were not only Jiang Hai's fish. There was also Jiang Hai's lobsters. All of them were of the highest quality. The highest quality abalones, the highest quality lobsters, the highest quality tuna, the highest quality salmon, the highest quality sea cucumbers, and so on. The purpose of this was to open the Japanese market. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy to open the door of a country for Walmart with just a bluefin golden gun. Hello, Miss Prawalton. I am Nakamura Masa, one of the people in charge of Walmart in Japan. Welcome for your guidance. While Jiang Hai and the others were waiting for the goods to be loaded, a middle-aged Japanese man ran over while gasping for breath. When he arrived in front of Jianghai and Polo Walton, he did a 90-degree bow without saying a word. His hands were firmly attached to his trousers, and his feet were side by side. After he got up, he introduced himself. "Hello, who is Nakamura Tetsuya to you?" Hearing this man's words, Prawalton looked at him coldly and said, For Prawalton, except for Jianghai, she looked at all men coldly. Sometimes, it was easier for a woman to talk business with her than a man. She seemed to have a natural attitude of rejecting men. Hearing Prawalton's words, Nakamura Masa continued to bow and said humbly, "It's my father. My father has already prepared a hotel and a banquet for you. Please come." Looking at his appearance, Jianghai couldn't help but whisper in his heart. He had to admit that at least on the surface, the Japanese people were flawless. It was said that it was difficult to slap a smiling face. When these guys saw others, they bowed 90 degrees and spoke very respectfully. Of course, no one knew what he was thinking in his heart. Maybe he was cursing Jianghai and the others in his heart. Sorry, I have to say no to his kindness. This is Mr. Jianghai, our company's most important partner. Because he has an unpleasant past with some Japanese families, it is difficult for us to trust a local hotel. I have already booked a hotel. If you don't mind, please invite your father to the hotel to discuss. Prawalton listened to Nakamura Masa in front of her and said very calmly. Then she took Jianghai's arm and got into a Rolls-Royce that had already driven over. Azalina and Wallace Shelley naturally followed. Azalina sat in the co-driver's seat, while Wallace Shelley sat beside Jianghai. Seeing Jianghai and the others leave, Nakamura Masa didn't have any objections. He just bowed all the way and respectfully sent off Jianghai and the others. After Jianghai and the others left, Nakamura Masa raised his head and muttered a few words. Then he took out his mobile phone and called his father. He didn't dare to discount Prawalton's words. At this time, Jianghai and the others were shuttling through the streets of Dongjing. Although Jianghai was very reluctant to admit it, Dongjing was indeed a very prosperous city. According to the world rankings, Dongjing could be ranked in the world's top 3 in terms of economy and population. After all, Japan was only made up of a few small islands. Whether it was resources or development space, it was very narrow. Therefore, their strategy was to gather the resources of the whole country to develop Dongjing. It turned out that they were right to do so. With the development of Dongjing, the other surrounding countries slowly followed. According to the words of a great man in China, this was called letting some people get rich first. Later, South Korea also adopted this method. South Korea was mainly their capital. The other places slowly developed after the rise of the capital. Jianghai had also been to the capital of South Korea, but to be honest, it did seem to be worse than Dongjing. From the airport to the city, the faster they walked, the more high-rise buildings Jianghai saw. Dongjing could be regarded as one of the fastest cities in the world. Basically, on the streets of Dongjing, almost everyone walked very fast. Almost everyone trotted across the street when the traffic light turned green. To be honest, Jianghai, who was used to the slow pace of life, was a little uncomfortable. Dongjing is like this. The pace of life here is faster than New York. Maybe it's because of the frequent earthquakes in Japan, so the safety of the people is not enough. They can only relieve their anxiety through work. You haven't been here at night. Later, we can come out and have a look. It's very interesting and crazy. Looking at Jianghai's eyes, Prawalton also said with a smile. Hearing her words, Jianghai shrugged. He didn't have much love for Japan. Of course, in the past, his computer stored a lot of educational videos of teachers, which benefited him a lot. At least for many nights, he relied on these things to get through. The car was not driving fast on the streets of Dongjing. It could be said that it was very slow. Although it was not the morning rush hour or the evening rush hour, it was not the kind of traffic jam that was completely stagnant. The car was moving, but the speed was basically about 20 miles per hour. The fastest speed was about 40 miles per hour, which made Jianghai a little impatient. But no matter how impatient he was, he still had to sit. Finally, the car slowly arrived at the hotel Prawalton booked. After walking into the hotel, they did not go to the elevator. Instead, they went directly to the back of the hotel. Prawalton lived in a small, independent Japanese-style courtyard. Chapter 985. The small courtyard didn't look big, but it wasn't small either. There was a circle of bodyguards in black standing around. These people were here to protect the safety of this small courtyard. Inside the small courtyard, the pond, the rooms, everything was similar to the Japanese courtyard in the anime. After Jiang Hai walked in, he saw that there were a total of 6 rooms, 3 of which had collapsed and 3 of which had beds. How do you want to live? Anyway, you're going to live with me. Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton said with a smile. Although she also satisfied her cravings on the plane, sometimes it was like this. The more she satisfied herself, the more she wanted it. If it weren't for the fact that she had just arrived, Prawalton didn't even want to pull Jiang Hai into the room now. Here, after choosing, Jiang Hai chose a large bedroom and pointed inside. Azalina and Wallace Shelley lived directly next to this room. They didn't want to live with Jiang Hai these days, so they let Jiang Hai and Prawalton live outside for a few days. Well, let's clean up. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also laughed, and then motioned to the waiter who had been staying outside to come in and clean up. After all the cleaning was done, Jiang Hai and the others also moved in. Of course, before moving in, Azalina and Wallace Shelley had to check it again to make sure there was no problem before they were allowed to live. Where did you get these bodyguards? They're so powerful, beautiful, good in skills, good in figure, and rigorous in work. TSK, I am a little envious. After Azalina and Wallace Shelley finished checking and left, Prawalton took off her coat and lay on the bed, smiling at Jiang Hai. They're not ordinary people. They're special agents trained in Ulan. Azalina escaped. After I learned about the situation, I went to buy them. Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai briefly explained the origin of Azalina and the others. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton couldn't help but be stunned. You dare to use agents? Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton didn't go into too much detail. The strength of agents in this world was obvious to all. Everyone knew that they were very good, but those who dared to use them were basically desperados. The real rich people didn't dare to use agents, especially the retired agents. Rich people were different from drug dealers or those in the gray society. These people dared to use agents because they knew that agents were double-edged swords. If they didn't listen to them, they could just kill them directly. However, rich people couldn't kill people casually. The same was true for businessmen like Jiang Hai, and these agents were basically very knowledgeable people. If you bought them, these people might collude in private and kidnap you when you went out or something like that. This was because special agents had no loyalty to speak of, especially those who had retired. Their organization was more like a mercenary group. They would listen to whoever paid them more. Because of this, special agents were quite unpopular in the bodyguard world. Prawalton didn't expect that Jiang Hai's people were all agents, and Jiang Hai trusted them so much. Don't doubt the people you use, and don't use the people you suspect. This has always been my policy. I believe in them. Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai also smiled, and then lay down beside her. Jiang Hai was telling the truth. He really thought so. Well, with this thing of yours, I'm not afraid that they won't give in. Do you want to warm up first? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton didn't want to destroy Jiang Hai's internal unity, so she changed the topic and said with a smile, "Didn't you have enough on the plane?" Looking at Prawalton, who had climbed on top of him, Jiang Hai sighed. "How can I have enough with you? Really, we only have a few days. We have to seize every minute and every second." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton patted Jiang Hai and said with a smile. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai didn't talk nonsense. He turned over and pressed her under his body. The war began like this. More than 2 hours later, the clouds dispersed. Jiang Hai and Prawalton, who was obviously full, walked out of the room. "Boss," just as you entered the room, an old man from Japan came to see Prawalton, but the people outside said that you had already rested. He should still be waiting outside now. Hearing the sound of Jiang Hai and Prawalton opening the door, Wallace Shelley and Azalina also walked out of the room and said to Jiang Hai, It should be Nakamura Tetsuya. Let's go. Hearing Walasheli's words, Prawalton also smiled, and then freely took Jiang Hai and walked outside. When they just came out, they saw an old man and a young man sitting by the pond in the distance drinking tea. Seeing Jiang Hai coming out, the two people immediately stood up. Jiang Hai had seen one of the two people before. It was Nakamura Masa, and the other old man seemed to be in his 60s. He looked 70% similar to Nakamura Masa. It seemed that this was his father, Nakamura Tetsuya, that Prawalton mentioned. Miss Prawalton, welcome, welcome. Seeing Prawalton, the two people narrowed their eyes and smiled. Nakamura Masa still bowed 90 degrees, and Nakamura Tetsuya was unlikely to bow 90 degrees, but he also took the initiative to bow about 60 degrees. To be honest, although Jiang Hai didn't like Japanese people very much, maybe no one in the Northeast liked Japanese people. But when he saw an old man bowing to him, he also felt a little awkward, so he thought about it and wanted to return it. But Prawalton saw it first and straightened Jiang Hai's waist. You're an existence of a higher level than them, so just nod your head. Leaning in Jiang Hai's ear, Prawalton said to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also nodded. He really didn't understand these things. Sure enough, Jiang Hai just nodded. The two people didn't feel the slightest bit wrong. Before coming, they had already inquired about Jiang Hai's identity. The owner of the Soaring Dragon Manor, the current #1 beef supplier in the Western world, and also planned to seize the #1 seafood supplier in the Western world. His total assets were even tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. But because his assets were not listed, no one could know exactly how much money he had, but it was inevitable that he was more advanced than them. In their view, Jiang Hai should be regarded as the top existence at present, far from what they could compare with. It was already good that such a high-level figure could nod to them. In Japan and South Korea, age was indeed the key to measuring a person, but social status was also quite important. I'm a little hungry, let's eat and talk. Seeing that Nakamura Masa and Nakamura Tetsuya were so polite, Prawalton's attitude towards them eased a little, and she was ready to give them a chance to have dinner with her. I've already prepared this way, please. Hearing Prawalton's words, Nakamura Tetsuya said with a smile, and then took the initiative to lead Jiang Hai and the others into the hotel. This Nakamura father and son were originally the managers of Shio department store. In 2002, Walmart bought 37% of the shares of Shio department store and became the largest shareholder. It entered the Japanese market, but later suffered losses for years and had to withdraw. But in 2007, my uncle was in power. He was a very extreme person, and he directly bought all the shares of Shio department store and then increased the dumping. Now in Japan, although Walmart is not making money, at least it's not losing money, and it can be considered to have made a name for itself. My uncle is very decisive in this matter. Looking at the two people leading the way in front, Prawalton also introduced the two people situation. At present, these two people were relatively trustworthy. After all their assets were in Walmart. If they annoyed Prawalton, who is the current manager of Sam's Club, they would be in big trouble. Jiang Hai also met Prawalton's family. To be honest, Prawalton's father gave people the appearance of a defender. Walmart would not make a big mistake in his hands, and it would only be stable. But Prawalton's uncle was a very aggressive pioneer. If Walmart did not make a lot of money in his hands, it would suffer a lot of losses. This was inevitable. It depends on the choice of Walmart's shareholders. At present, because of the relationship between Prawalton and Jiang Hai, Prawalton's father was slightly older, but who knows what will happen in the future. Following these two people, Jiang Hai walked quite fast. It didn't take long for them to come to a small Japanese restaurant, but at this time, there was only one table here. There were cups, bowls, seasonings, and chopsticks on the table, but there were no dishes. After everyone sat down, Nakamura Tetsuya clapped his hands, and then a group of people came in from outside. The leader was a young girl, wearing the kind of kimono often seen on TV. After walking in, she first knelt in front of Jiang Hai, then took the initiative to take off her clothes. What the hell is this? Looking at this girl, Jiang Hai was a little confused. He didn't quite understand what it meant, but Prawalton's eyes lit up. He patted Jiang Hai gently under the table. Just watch. This thing is called female body shang. It is a very novel way to eat. Chapter 986. A female body shang. Looking at the Prawalton, Jiang Hai had never eaten this thing before, but he had heard of it before. According to legend, this thing first appeared in Japan. When it first appeared, there was a group of wolves howling. But after so many years, everyone gradually forgot about it. This was the first time Jiang Hai had seen such a thing. Mina Sanwada, Shiva, Udai, Anai, Jimai, Sa, Oily Pants Onagai Momasu. Just as Jiang Hai was looking at the girl here, the girl had already taken off her clothes. She knelt down and said to the people in front of her. At the same time, she was also showing her body. Jiang Hai's mind went through the girl's words. His Japanese was at half a level, and he mainly learned it from some teachers. This girl should be introducing herself. Cough. Jiang Hai usually read novels with a plot. He was a person who was more sentimental. This girl, in Jiang Hai's eyes, was about 14 or 15 years old, more or less. Anyway, Japanese girls were indeed quite petite. It was hard to tell how old they were. They weren't very pretty, but they had a small round face and a slightly sharp chin. To be honest, they were very cute. When people looked at them, they would have the urge to protect them. Ravage her? Well, actually, it was about the same meaning. This girl looked very much like a teacher named Sakaguchi Miya. Jiang Hai had once read her works, but this girl was whiter than the teacher. Her eyes were also more watery. Her figure was very slender, not fat, not thin. He couldn't see her bones at all. She didn't have a single hair on her body. What surprised Jiang Hai the most was that this girl's upper body and lower body were pink and white. Of course, there was no hair on her body. This is the vessel this time. Her name is Yu-Chan, and she is 15 years old this year. She is specially trained to become a female. She needs to start training before her menarche at the age of 12. She is not allowed to have any hair on her body. She also needs to be soaked in fresh milk for 2 hours a day. There are strict requirements for her food and accommodation. At the same time, she has to have type A blood. Most importantly, she has to be of type C. Ladies and gentlemen, please. Please come in, Nakamura said softly when he saw Jiang Hai looking at this girl. Hearing Nakamura's words, the girl lay down on the table in front of her. Then, a few middle-aged women came in. After carefully bowing, they knelt in front of the girl and placed things on the girl's body. Looking at this girl in front of him, Jiang Hai more or less felt that she was a bit perverted. Cough, this is not good. It's too insulting. Pulling Prawalton's clothes, Jiang Hai looked at her and whispered. To be honest, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, but Jiang Hai still had a bottom line. Mr. Jiang, you're wrong. This is also a job, and they are willing to do it. The female body is also divided into different levels, but even the lowest level, the income is higher than the average manager. For example, Yo in front of us. The cost of each appearance is 17 million yen, equivalent to about 1 million yuan. This is already a high income in Tokyo. Although Jiang Hai's voice was not loud, the room was still too small, so it was easy for the two people in front of him to hear. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Nakamura also spoke to Jiang Hai in his half-baked Chinese. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai didn't know what to say because the word willing blocked his words. In Huaxia, Jiang Hai had been taught that pornography, gambling, drugs, and so on were all evil. There was no such thing as voluntary. For example, in all the Huaxia movies and TV series, all the people in the brothel were forced to do so. They were sold and then forced to work as women in certain special jobs. So Jiang Hai was instilled with this idea since he was a child. But since he came to the United States, he found that things were not like this. In this industry, there were quite a few people who treated this as a career. They didn't think that there was anything shameful about doing such a thing. Instead, they liked it very much. They could make money and feel comfortable. There was nothing wrong with it. So Jiang Hai's worldview was quite subverted abroad. At this time, he really didn't know what to say. This was because he didn't know if this girl was really willing or not. If he were to make a move and she didn't want him, then Jiang Hai would be in an awkward position. Besides, he had only heard of it before. This was the first time he tried it so close. He felt a little lost if he didn't eat it. Soon, when Jiang Hai was in a dilemma, the middle-aged women over there had finished setting up. Then, they bowed to Jiang Hai and walked out. After closing the door, Nakamura Masa and Nakamura Tetsuya were still sitting far away, motioning to Jiang Hai to eat. Aren't they eating? Seeing that the two people didn't move, Jiang Hai looked at Prawalton with some doubts. Them? Don't worry about them. They won't eat with us. Let's add some seasoning. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton shrugged and said, the Americans were the least particular about the concept of hierarchy, but the Japanese were the most particular. No matter what they said, they wouldn't eat with the Walton family. Of course, banquets were an exception. They didn't have the status to sit at the table at such a private banquet. Prawalton was also used to this. After all, they treated everyone the same. Since Prawalton said so, Jiang Hai didn't hold back. He made mustard and soy sauce and some vinegar and poured it into a small plate. Although it wasn't as delicious as Chi Ya's, it wasn't very bad. After everything was done, Jiang Hai glanced at the girl in front of him. At this time, the girl's body was full of ingredients, mainly sashimi, all kinds of fish, lobster, sea urchin yellow, sea cucumber slices, prawns, and so on. There were also some shelled crab legs, and so on. In addition, there was sushi. Jiang Hai didn't eat sashimi because before he got the Dragon Ball, his stomach wasn't very good. After he got the Dragon Ball, he was naturally cured of all diseases. However, he still wasn't used to eating sashimi, so he didn't eat sashimi. Fortunately, the other party understood, so he cooked the prawns and other things, except that the shell was removed. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai picked up a prawn with his chopsticks and put it on his plate to take a bite. I don't feel anything different. You have to eat this thing with sauce. Looking at Jiang Hai's expression that didn't have any special taste, Prawalton smiled and said to Jiang Hai, but hearing her words, Jiang Hai pointed to the plate in his hand. Isn't this sauce? I mean, you have to eat it with sauce. Just like this. Prawalton met Jiang Hai's gaze and chuckled, then used the silver chopsticks in her hand to pinch a protruding part of the girl's upper body that can't be described. Well, it tastes great. Don't you want to try it? Prawalton said happily after putting it into her mouth and chewing twice. Hey, why are you so disgusting? I don't eat that thing. Needless to say, Jiang Hai also knows what that thing is and immediately shook his head. Although he likes beautiful women, he is not a pervert. He doesn't have this kind of hobby. I don't believe that you haven't eaten it. You have eaten it with me. Those in your house, which one haven't you tasted? Prawalton said contemptuously to Jiang Hai as she rolled her eyes at him. Obviously, she thinks that Jiang Hai is pretending to be serious. That's different. Waving his hand, even if Jiang Hai talks about this topic, he still can't let it go. What's the difference? It's nothing more than her eating yours and you eating hers. How much is this girl's first time? Prawalton rolled her eyes at Jiang Hai and said to the Nakamura father and son, leave it all to us. You don't have to worry about it. It's her honor. When they heard Prawalton's words, Nakamura Masa and Nakamura Tetsuya bowed down in surprise. For them, if this small amount of money can make Prawalton and Jiang Hai happy, it is naturally the best, but Jiang Hai waved his hand. I said, stop here, I'm not here to do this. Looking at Prawalton, Jiang Hai said seriously, he is indeed not a picky person, but he can't be so desperate, right? After all, as the old saying goes, you are like a demon before you fuck, but you are like a Buddha after you fuck. Although he didn't fuck just now. After all, he talked with Prawalton for 2 hours, and now he is not short of women. Well, it's up to you. Seeing Jiang Hai's serious face, Prawalton smiled. She likes to see Jiang Hai like this. Whether it is outside or on some battlefield, she can't resist Jiang Hai's orders. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai glanced at her, then picked up another shrimp and ate it. The girl, who had been lying on the table without moving, turned her head at this time and looked at Jiang Hai with a trace of gratitude in her eyes. Although in their line of work, sooner or later they would lose their first time, but if they could delay it by a day, it would be best to delay it by a day. She was really grateful to Jiang Hai. Chapter 987. President, the latest news, Jiang Hai has come to Tokyo. Just as Jiang Hai was enjoying the special Japanese dishes in the hotel, in a huge house somewhere in Tokyo, a man in a suit knelt in front of an old man in Japanese clothes and said with a serious face. After hearing his words, the old man just nodded slightly, then took the tea handed over by a girl beside him and took a sip gently. This Jiang Hai is really courageous. He even dares to come to Tokyo. Doesn't he know that he has offended us? Putting down the tea, the old man said indifferently. Hearing his words, the man in front of him lowered his head even more. He came with Miss Walton of the Walton family. The security measures are quite tight. Only the father and son of the Nakamura family can see them. Looking at the old man in front of him, the man said with a serious face, "Nakamura, tell the people below that I want to see them." Hearing his words, the old man gently took a sip of tea, then chuckled and said very indifferently. He still had some confidence in the Nakamura clan, which was a fence-sitter. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know that someone was targeting him. In fact, even if he knew, he wouldn't care. When he came, he was already prepared to be targeted. He was not afraid of being targeted because his strength and level now can be ignored. You know, Jiang Hai has never been in existence that can be easily bullied. After dinner, Walton specially brought Jiang Hai and the Nakamura father and son to discuss how to use these 2 days to promote. The time of this fish is limited, so promotion is naturally very important. According to Tetsuya Nakamura, the best way is to transport the fish to their store in Tsukiji Market and auction it directly there. That is to promote their store and sell it at a good price there. Of course, this has to be discussed by Jiang Hai. After all, there will be fewer customers. For example, some people who don't get along with Walton will not come, but the general big customers will not be a problem. Jiang Hai was also very calm about this. He actually doesn't care much about this. He doesn't care whether Walton uses his fish to advertise, because this fish is more of a test. The specific plan will be decided by Walton as long as he pays for it. Since Jiang Hai is easy to talk to, other things are naturally easy to handle. Soon, the 3 people here had already discussed how to promote. Jiang Hai doesn't know much about these things, so he just sat there and rested. About an hour later, the 3 people also finished studying, and the Nakamura father and son left respectfully. "Let's go out and play." Watching the 2 people leave, Walton smiled and said to Jiang Hai, "Go out and play. Are you sure?" Hearing Walton's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at her with some doubts. Jiang Hai himself knows that he is very unpopular in Japan. Now he wants to go out and play. Is he looking for death? Don't worry, there will be no problem. My security is top-notch. Seeing Jiang Hai's surprised look, Walton also said with a smile. Hearing that she said there is no problem, Jiang Hai has nothing to say. Follow her. He went back and called Azalina and Wallace Shelley. Of course, the security guard were also there, but they were in the dark. If Jiang Hai didn't look carefully, he wouldn't be able to see them. On the surface, there were only the 4 of them. When they came to the hall, Jio-sun had already prepared the car. "Where are we going?" Getting in the car, Jiang Hai asked Walton. He's really not familiar with this place. Although many otakus have the idea of going to Japan, Jiang Hai didn't have a chance to come here before. Now he disdains to come here, so he doesn't know much about Japan. On the contrary, Walton has been here several times. The night view here in Yodo is still very good. We have 3 choices. If you want to buy things and enjoy the night here, then go to Ginza. If you want to get some delicious food, go to Shibuya. If you want to go to Izakaya, then go to Shinjuku. After getting in the car, Walton said to Jiang Hai with a smile, "Where do you want to go?" Hearing Walton's words, Jiang Hai asked Azalina and others behind him. "It's up to you, but you'd better not go to places with too many people. It will be dangerous." When Azalina heard Jiang Hai's words, she shrugged, indicating that she didn't care, and Wallace Shelley naturally smiled and didn't say anything. "Then let's go to Shibuya first, and then to Shinjuku." Walton raised his eyebrows at Jiang Hai and said with a smile, "Shibuya is a place name in Yodo. It was first established because of the Dongheng department store. In terms of commercial value, This place may be far less than Ginza, but young people prefer to be here. Shibuya is very noisy at night. There are many snacks here, and many young people play here. After Jiang Hai's car arrived here, the four of them got out of the car and came to Shibuya Central Street. As soon as they got out of the car, Jiang Hai had to sigh. The girls of this island country were really cold. In Japan, no matter the season, they had to wear skirts to school. At this time, it was almost the same on this street. There were all kinds of girls. They were wearing thick jackets, coats, and so on. After all, it was just the beginning of spring. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was winter, but they were basically wearing skirts below. Obviously, the sales of pants in Japan were not very ideal, especially for women's pants. During the day, Jiang Hai saw that the city was busy everywhere. At night, it was not much better. Even if they were young people, carrying the things they bought, or touring around, their footsteps were quite fast. They had no intention of strolling after dinner, so Jiang Hai took a look and retracted his gaze. He began to pay attention to the snacks in Shibuya. As for the beauties of Japan, cough. Have you heard of the four major sorcery of East Asia? Thailand's sex change, South Korea's plastic surgery, China's Photoshop, and Japan's makeup. God knows what these girls look like after removing their makeup. In any case, Jiang Hai didn't want to see it. Moreover, he was still in the state of a semi-sage. It didn't matter if he didn't see it. It was better to pay more attention to the snacks. To be honest, the snacks in Japan were quite rich. Of course, there was no way to compare with China, but there were many snack bars on the street, just like the night market in China. Jiang Hai originally didn't have much demand for women. It was mainly because of the effect of the Dragon Balls, but his pursuit of delicious food had always been there. Looking at these snacks, Jiang Hai's fingers were also moved. He couldn't help but walk over and take a look. When it comes to Japanese snacks, everyone basically has some understanding. After all, cartoons and such are often shown in them. There are also many such snack stalls in China. For example, Tonglu Oyaki, which is honey mixed with bean paste filling in the middle. This thing is also a lot in China. In cartoons, it is Doraemon's favorite. There is also Wagyu fruit, which is a cold cake in China. There is nothing to introduce. Sushi rolls were a type of sushi, and there were many of them on the streets of Tokyo. Rice balls were actually similar to sushi rolls, but there was more rice in them, and they were much cheaper. They were considered a relatively cheap snack. Taiyaki is similar to Tonglu Oyaki, but the dough is made into a fish shape and the inside is also filled with bean paste. Octopus balls, this is Jiang Hai's favorite snack. He often eats them in China. Naturally, you want to try the authentic one here. Tempura is fried prawns. Of course, prawns are the best. In addition to prawns, there are also vegetables and fish. In addition, there is also Odin and fried chicken. Jiang Hai is not a fan of fried chicken. There are a lot of fried chicken in the United States, but he is still very interested in Odin. Along the way, Prawalton is looking at the girls in clothes. Azalina and Wallace Shelley are looking at the surroundings. Of course, they will occasionally look at the clothes and such. As for Jiang Hai, he is simply looking at the food. First, he bought 2 boxes of octopus balls. Then, he bought 10 skewers of Odin. Then, he bought a box of tempura. Finally, he bought a few teriyaki. To be honest, Jiang Hai didn't eat enough because he doesn't eat raw fish. On the other hand, the girl's body was basically full of raw fish. There was very little sushi and the like. It was impossible to put freshly fried fish on the girl's body. This was very inhumane. Therefore, Jiang Hai almost didn't eat anything. Now, he was making up for it. They eat along the way. When they're almost done shopping in Shibuya, Jiang Hai is almost done eating. Then let's go to the izakaya in Shinjuku. Seeing that Jiang Hai is almost done eating, Prawalton also said with a smile, "Oh, let's go." After stuffing the last fried prawn into his mouth, Jiang Hai also nodded. Then the 4 people returned to their car and drove directly to Yodo's famous red light, Cough, district. But when they approached here, their car was stopped by the police. Looking at the police who stopped the car, Jiang Hai and Prawalton couldn't help but frown. The police here knocked on the window and motioned Prawalton to lower the window. In other people's territory, Prawalton can't go against them. So he lowered the window and looked at the police standing beside him with some doubts to see what they are going to do. Chapter 988. Miss, hello. To enter the Shinjuku district, please accept the inspection. The window was pressed down, and the police outside were not as bad as imagined. Instead, one of them was full of smiles and politely said to Prawalton, "Go and talk to my people." Hearing his words, Prawalton didn't care and pressed the window again. At this time, a man in a black suit came over first. After negotiating with the police, he let Jiang Hai and the others enter. The man also walked to Prawalton's car and explained very politely. Recently, tourists often complain that the security in Shinjuku is not very good. In addition, the recent political situation is more sensitive, so the police will also set up a checkpoint here to check all the vehicles that want to enter this area to ensure the safety of the area. Looking at Jiang Hai and the others, the man said very indifferently. Then Prawalton nodded and went to the back car. Then Jiang Hai and the others drove directly into this area, but no one dared to check them. After Jiang Hai and the others drove in, they saw a lot of izakaya. Izakaya was not a brothel. If one were to describe it, it was somewhat similar to the food stalls in China. It cooked delicious food and let the men and women who had worked for a day boast here. In fact, it was not very messy inside. Everyone had their own compartment, so there were few people who made trouble. Basically, they were open all night. Of course, if they drank too much, it was not necessarily so. But Jiang Hai and the others said that they came to the izakaya, but not here. Their goal was actually Kabukicho. There was a special Kabukicho location in Shinjuku. It was a street called Kabukicho Street. Jiang Hai's car was parked here, but before going in, Prawalton deliberately waited for her bodyguards to arrive, then she walked in with Jiang Hai. The flashing red lights in every country were the same, a bit messy. Walking into Kabukicho Street, Jiang Hai found that this place was really bold. As soon as he walked in, he saw a lot of advertisements that made people's hormones burst out. For example, 40 minutes, 8,000 pills, and so on, in 24 hours. But at this time, the man who helped Jiang Hai and the others to avoid the police inspection came over. "Let me be your guide for the rest of the road." This person was a white man who looked to be about 30 years old. He looked at Prawalton and Jiang Hai and said with a serious face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai glanced at Prawalton. When he saw Prawalton nod, Jiang Hai also nodded. It seemed that this person should be a local tyrant here. First, don't look at these first things first. To be honest, these are all fake. They're all little girls who accompany you to chat. The Love Plus over there should be the most that kind of shop. That is, a little girl will come over and give you a bath. It's the kind of shop that is only responsible for taking off and not landing. If you want to land, you have to talk to them in private. The price is not something that ordinary people can compare to. Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed, this person also began to introduce the nearby situation. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was a little confused. There was such a thing? It seems that the Japanese are really treacherous. If ordinary tourists want to find the kind of people and shops that do that kind of thing, they have to look for the shop in front of us, which means that it's free. They're the head of the chicken here, but of course, they don't want to be completely free because it's very likely that they will find some annies for those tourists. If you want to play here, you have to find those very simple shops that have nothing to do with that kind of thing, such as a strawberry jam shop, a Shinjuku ice cream shop, and so on. At the same time, you also have to look at what they write outside. If it's pure Japanese, then it's not for foreigners, only for Japanese and English. Seeing that Jiang Hai understood, everyone continued to talk as they walked. At the same time, Prawalton's bodyguards also blocked the guys who wanted to come over to solicit customers. "You are very familiar with this place." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai looked at him meaningfully. "I'm a staff member of Walmart in Japan, so I've been here a few times with clients." "Oh right, let's not go any further. If we go any further, we will enter the territory of the male prostitutes." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man here smiled a little awkwardly. Then, when he saw a movie theater behind a dinosaur in the distance, he immediately changed the topic. Hearing his words, Prawalton and Jiang Hai also looked there. The two of them were not interested in men, so naturally, they would not go there. But Jiang Hai also took a look from afar. Basically, the signs there were some non-mainstream, punk, and so on. Their hair was more colorful than the other. There was no other way. This was popular in Japan and South Korea. It was really hard to imagine that some little girls in China liked this kind of thing. Anyway, in Jiang Hai's eyes, it was quite disgusting. "Mr. Jiang, do you want to look for service here?" After looking around briefly, the man here asked Jiang Hai and Prawalton. He also heard some of Miss Prawalton's hobbies, but usually Prawalton was very reliable. She would not show her hobbies in front of her subordinates. It was precisely because of Jiang Hai that she found a sly guy to accompany Jiang Hai. But accompanying her man to such a place was really exciting. Looking at the man, although Jiang Hai was not very interested in these kind of services, he still asked, "Do you have any idea?" "Here, there are cheap and expensive services. For example, half a set of services is basically done by hand, and you can't do that. The pink salon over there is the cheapest, and the time is the shortest, about 6,000 yen. The Vision Club over there is also half a set of services, but it can be combined with the temptation of uniforms, and the price is between 10,000 and 12,000 yen. The Vision Club over there is about the same level, but it's slightly more expensive, 15,000 to 20,000 yen. The hotel pays for the cost of a night's stay, which is between 20,000 and 40,000 yen. The quality of the girls in the bubble bath is pretty good, but it's divided into high, and low grades, and the price ranges from 30,000 to 100,000 yen. The quality of the girls in the bubble bath is very high, but it's only half a set, and the price is between 40,000 and 70,000 yen. The girls in the high-end date are basically models and university students, and the price is between 80,000 and 150,000 yen. The highest grade is the hot spring date, where they will send you to a nearby hot spring for a day, and the price is basically about 400,000 yen. There are also some agencies here that specialize in booking AWA actresses and some female celebrities, and the price is between 300,000 and 800,000 yen. If Mr. Jiang needs it, I can contact them at any time. Oh, right, everything in the shop is not allowed as it's illegal. In Japan, there are clear rules that forbid it, so if you want to do it, you can only go to a hotel. Also, at this time, the kabukicho basically only executes the customers recommended by regular customers and regular customers. Ordinary strangers will also be rejected. Looking at Jiang Hai, this person started to talk nonstop. It seems like he really wasn't an ordinary old driver. "You can't do that. It's so boring. Let's go back. Since we can make an appointment, it's the same if we go back." Hearing this person's introduction, Jiang Hai didn't speak, but Pra Walton on the other side spoke up. She saw very clearly that even men couldn't do that, let alone women, so it was better to go back and play than to do that. "Well, okay, let's go back." Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai didn't say much, although he still wanted to see more here. He didn't come here for that, so he walked out first. "Hey, didn't you just say that we can make an appointment with AWA actresses and female stars? Do you have any photos or something to show me?" But Jiang Hai left, but Prawalton pulled the man and said with interest. Hearing Prawalton's words, the man was a little confused because he didn't know what was wrong with Prawalton. He thought that he flattered her too much. He was a little embarrassed for a while. It was all his fault. How could he say those words so easily? "Don't talk nonsense, show me." Seeing that the man's face was not right, Prawalton didn't care. Sometimes it was interesting to scare these men, not to mention that she was now very interested in these AWA actresses. "Well, okay, I'm only familiar with this Idea Pocket company." Hearing Prawalton's urging, the man had no other choice but to bow, then took out his mobile phone and quickly entered a website. Some girls' photos appeared on the mobile phone. Is it okay? Are the photos reliable? Looking at the mobile phone in her hand, even Prawalton knew that the makeup skills of Japanese girls were very magical, so Prawalton was a little uncertain. These are all quite reliable. After thinking about it, the man whispered. And then this one called Yukitina, this one called Amami Hai, this one called Ai Haneda. Is this Nishiki Jessica mixed blood? Including her, and this Himi Mizuko. Let's start with these 5 people. Tell them to wait for us in the room. Hearing the words of the man, Prawalton casually nodded and found a few pleasing to the eye. Chapter 989. When Jiang Hai and Prawalton returned to the hotel, the people there had already called the company. For people who could please the Walmart group, the company spared no effort, not to mention the people from the head office. So in less than half an hour, the 5 girls selected by Prawalton had already arrived from various places. They took a shower, put on makeup, changed their clothes, and came to Prawalton's room. At this time, Jiang Hai and the others were still on the road. It was not that Prawalton did not want to drive fast, but it was because he could not drive fast. He had to admit that the traffic in Dongjing was more congested than in the capital. Although it was already midnight, the cars on the road were still very slow, stopping from time to time. At about 10:30 in the evening, Jiang Hai and the others returned home. But as soon as they entered the house, Azalina and Wallace Shelley looked at each other, then asked Jiang Hai and Prawalton to wait for a while. Then they walked in and opened the door of Prawalton's room while holding a gun in one hand. As soon as the door opened, they saw 5 girls in bathrobes chatting. When they saw the door suddenly open, the 5 girls immediately knelt down and greeted the people outside. Well, don't scare them. I asked them to come over. Let's learn together. Looking at the 5 teachers here, Prawalton, who was a little nervous at first, laughed and then said to Azalina and the others, "They're outsiders. We will sleep here." If it was just Jiang Hai and Prawalton, or even Prawalton's girls, Azalina and the others would not care. But now that there were outsiders, they had to care. Seeing that Azalina and Wallace Shelley were ready to stay, Prawalton also smiled and then pushed Jiang Hai in. "Your mission today is to serve this person well. Of course, you'll have to teach us your unique skills." Prawalton looked at the 5 teachers in front of him and said with a smile. After hearing Prawalton's words, the 5 teachers nodded shyly and took the initiative to stand up and walk to Jiang Hai. Meanwhile, Jiang Hai was already in a daze. Among the teachers in front of him, 3 of them were very familiar to him, and 2 of them looked familiar. Tina Yumiju, whose stage name was Rio. Jiang Hai knew a lot of her educational videos, such as the Newlyweds, campus beauty pageants, and so on. Although the license plate number couldn't be announced here, he knew a lot of her educational videos. As for that Tian Hai, some people said that her cough, the parts that shouldn't be described were fake, and that her acting was a bit exaggerated, but wasn't she beautiful? Jiang Hai's computer still had the video she made in school. That Zizaki Jessica, Jiang Hai knew that she had a lot of videos, such as Racing Queen, Newcomer Beauty, and so on. Of course, Jiang Hai himself had never seen it. No matter if others believed it or not, he believed it anyway. As for the other 2 teachers, although Jiang Hai didn't know their names, he was familiar with them. Now that he saw them in person, although Jiang Hai just said that he wasn't interested in them, the Dragon Balls in his body were ready to move at this time. "We will teach you some skills in this regard and the reaction of a man, so that you can be more comfortable and harmonious in your future life." The 5 teachers came in front of Jiang Hai and helped Jiang Hai take off his clothes. Zizaki Jessica, who was a quarter Italian, also modestly said to the 3 women beside her. Hearing her words, Azalina was a little embarrassed. Wallace Shelley was ready to take note, and Prawalton was watching the situation here without blinking. Soon, they took off Jiang Hai's clothes, and they also took off their bathrobes. At this time, they were also wearing some more sexy clothes inside. Of course, they didn't cover the places that should be covered. Then the teachers knelt in front of Jiang Hai and began the pre-battle preparations that shouldn't be described. The indescribable swallowing and spitting is also a skill. The most indescribable point is where he can't be described, and when he's teasing, he can't keep attacking there. Looking at Prawalton, Azalina, and Wallace Shelley in front of her, Zizaki Jessica, who is the best at English, let the others demonstrate. She also took over from time to time and explained to them at the same time. Originally, Jiang Hai had always been very strong in this regard. After all, his physical fitness was there, but this time he couldn't hold on for 15 minutes after a while when the battle started, how to use his waist and legs. Not only could his legs clamp Jiang Hai's waist, but he could also put them on his shoulders. He could also use his toes to brush his hair. There is also the coordination of other support personnel. How to attack, how to maximize the battle, which angle was the most comfortable, which angle was the best, which angle was the wrong one. Looking at the 5 teachers in front of her teaching one by one, Azalina was a little embarrassed at first, but later she also watched. As for Prawalton, he had already taken off his clothes and was touching himself while watching the battle in front of him. Usually, when Jiang Hai fought against 5 people, he could still fight fiercely. But in front of these professional teachers, Jiang Hai was a little embarrassed. In the past, the time was shortened quickly, and he couldn't hold on for more than 20 minutes. But in the eyes of these teachers, it was already amazing. One must know that ordinary people might not even be able to hold on for more than 10 minutes, and all the actors had to take drugs. But they were still straight, which was convenient for filming. And most importantly, the person had to be replaced. Unlike Jiang Hai, there was no problem at all in this scene. Tawana even smiled and asked Jiang Hai if he wanted to be a male actor. It must be a very powerful existence. While Jiang Hai and his women were studying here, on the other side of the Akita mansion, Nakamura, who Jiang Hai met today, was led into the mansion by someone. When he came to the main house, he saw an old man sitting at the head of the table. Nakamura Masa greets President Akita. Seeing the old man, Nakamura Masa took a few steps forward and bowed. Then he just stood there and looked at the old man who was drinking tea in front of him. He didn't intend to sit down and talk about the old days. Masa, you don't have to be so polite. We are old acquaintances. How is your father? Looking at Nakamura Masa in front of him, the old man surnamed Akita put down the tea in his hand and said to Nakamura Masa with a smile, "Thanks to you, he's fine, but it's already very late today, so my father went back to rest. If there's anything, you can tell me." Looking at President Akita, Nakamura Masa just smiled, then said seriously, "Good. You really have the shadow of your father. Well, I want to tell you, you should know, right? How about it? Are you ready to help me?" Looking at Nakamura Masa, President Akita smiled, then said with a golden light in his eyes, "Sorry, I don't know what you're talking about." But unfortunately, Nakamura Masa ignored him. "You don't understand? All right, I'll be frank. I want you to help me deal with Jiang Hai." Seeing that Nakamura Masa didn't agree, President Akita frowned, then said seriously. But hearing his words, Nakamura Masa turned around and was about to leave. "What? We haven't talked about the conditions yet? You rejected it? Are you and your father so willing to be the dogs of the Americans?" Looking at Nakamura Masa's uncooperative look, President Akita's eyes narrowed and killing intent surged. "We are businessmen. We won't do things that don't benefit us. Moreover, even if my father and I are dogs, we will choose a good master. Compared to you, to be honest, whether it's strength, magnanimity, or power, you are far inferior." Hearing President Akita's words, Nakamura Masa said with disdain, "The Japanese are like this. When you're not as strong as them, you can reason with them, but they won't reason with you. They will tell you that the fist is the reason, but when your fist is bigger than them, and after beating them, they won't talk about the law with you. They still think that the fist is the reason." Comparing the Akita family and the Walton family is like the difference between an ant and an elephant. Nakamura Masa was ambitious, but he wasn't stupid. If he really followed them to deal with Jiang Hai, it's not a big deal whether they can deal with him or not. But after that, the Walton family's revenge will destroy his family. Under the premise that it has nothing to do with politics, he naturally made a choice. If Jiang Hai is fine, then they will still be the representatives of the Walton family. If something happens to Jiang Hai, they will be dead. What should he choose? Is there a need to say it? So the moment President Akita opened his mouth, he had already made his decision. These bastards without national integrity, idiots, shit. Looking at Nakamura Masa walking out, President Akita didn't dare to kill him at this time. So he had no other choice but to curse. But he was not willing to let Jiang Hai go just like that. Chapter 990. His few mile. The next morning, when Jiang Hai walked out of the room, his feet were floating. It was because what he felt last night was not something to be told to outsiders. The 5 professional teachers were indeed professionals. After teaching the students, they personally guided the 3 students and the teaching equipment, which was Jiang Hai. After a few close contacts, Jiang Hai felt that their fighting strength had increased, making Jiang Hai speechless. After he woke up this morning, the other girls and teachers also came out. After he came out, the other girls and teachers also came out. After all, the status of the teachers was not high. So after saying goodbye to Jiang Hai and the others, they left. Of course, when they left, each of them received a check of $100,000 from Jiang Hai. $1 was equal to 115 yen, and $100,000 was equal to 11,500,000 yen. According to the person yesterday, the appearance fee of an ordinary actress was between 300,000 to 800,000 yen, and these top actresses were around 1,000,000 yen, which was about 60,000 yen. Now that Jiang Hai directly gave them tens of millions of yen, these teachers couldn't help but be grateful. At the same time, they also thought in their hearts that this was Jiang Hai's recognition of their teaching last night, and at the same time, they were also very touched. On the other side, Hitsaki Jessica also asked Jiang Hai if they needed to come over to teach tonight. They didn't need to charge tonight. After all, tens of millions of yen was indeed a lot of money in Japan. However, Jiang Hai waved his hand, indicating that they didn't need to come. It wasn't that he was uncomfortable last night, but that he was too comfortable. However, if he continued to be so comfortable, Jiang Hai's body might not be able to withstand it. After all, he could no longer withstand 1 drop of that 10 drops of blood. After these teachers left, Jiang Hai and the others also went to eat breakfast. Japan's breakfast was actually very simple. In the past, the Western world used artillery to blast open Japan's trade gate, so Japan's acceptance of some Western food was extremely high. For example, in China, although some people drink coffee and eat sandwiches in the morning, more families still eat big fruit, fried dough sticks, drink tofu pudding, eat ramen, wonton, and so on. This was the eating habits of Huaxia. The eating habits of Japan were more similar to those of the West. It was indeed because they didn't have time to eat breakfast according to the Chinese or Japanese style. The pace of life here was too fast. In order to sleep a little longer, in order to not squeeze so many people on the tram, the breakfast of ordinary office workers was Western, sandwiches, and coffee. If they lived with their parents, they might have some rice balls or something. That was it. After Jiang Hai and the others arrived at the hotel's buffet restaurant, they basically saw Western food. Of course, there were rice balls, sushi, and so on. Among these things, Jiang Hai's favorite was something called potato pancake. This thing was made of potatoes, slices of ham, a bowl of beans, and eggs. It was like a pancake. The eggs were wrapped in these things, and then there was ketchup on the side. This was casually placed. Foreigners, especially Europeans and Americans, like to eat ketchup very much. However, Japan continued to have the taste of Huaxia, so their acceptance of this thing was just okay. After eating breakfast, Jiang Hai and the others casually went out to play. Since they had come to Tokyo, it was impossible for them not to go out at all. So they went to Tokyo Tower, Clear Sky Tower, or something like that. Anyway, it was just some landmark buildings. At noon, they went to eat a very famous ramen called Eating Noodle House. This noodle house had a total of 3 kinds of ramen, dienmian, ramen, and buckwheat noodles. The soup was also divided into thick fish noodles and aromatic noodles. According to the internet, their soup didn't use pork bones at all, so the taste was a little different from ordinary ramen. Therefore, the king of ramen, there was no puffer bone ramen here, but the other ramen tasted quite good. Jiang Hai ate their signature barbecued pork and thick fish noodles. He had to admit that the taste was really good. In Japan, ramen was actually a dish, not noodles. Many people ate ramen with rice. Jiang Hai couldn't stand it, so he ate 2 bowls of ramen and didn't order any rice or noodles to go with it. After eating ramen, Jiang Hai and the others went out to play again in the afternoon. In the evening, the father and son from Nakamura came again. They didn't see them today because they were arranging the promotion in Tsukiji Market. As far as the current situation was concerned, the effect was quite good. Of course, the dinner was also arranged by them, but they didn't eat any women's soup. This was because they also learned that Jianghai didn't eat raw food. That was why they specially called a teppanyaki chef to make teppanyaki for Jianghai and the others tonight. When it came to teppanyaki, many people would think that this thing was from Japan. In fact, this method of eating was first invented by the Spanish. It was a poor way of eating. Later, it was spread to the United States and Mexico. In other words, this method of eating was actually mastered by the Americans earlier than the Japanese, but it was the Japanese who carried it forward. Now, when it came to teppanyaki, people only knew about Japan, but not Spain and the United States. However, he had to admit that the master in Japan was quite skilled. Teppanyaki could be used to make almost anything, such as fish, shrimp, scallops, vegetables, beef, and so on. It could be used to make fried rice, fried noodles, etc. Jianghai also liked this method of eating, but usually at home, Chia didn't have the cooking skills to feed nearly 20 people, so Jianghai couldn't eat it at home, but here he didn't care. After dinner, Jianghai was quite satisfied. Then he went back to rest. In the next 2 days, Jianghai and Prawalton went out to play during the day and tried new tricks in the hotel at night. Unknowingly, it was already the day of the fish auction. The place where Jianghai auctioned the fish was Tsukiji Market. Perhaps many people who had read foreign farming novels would be familiar with Tsukiji Market. This was the largest fish market in Japan and the second largest farmers market. It was opened in 1935. Jianghai didn't need to memorize anything here. After all, he could find it on the internet. For example, the information about Kabukicho Street was not easy to find on the internet, so Jianghai went to popularize it. Tsukiji Market was originally the largest fish market, but now it was the largest fish market as well as the largest tourist market. The shops in the market were clearly separated. Some were doing wholesale, and some were doing retail. Just like how some shops in the street didn't do business with foreigners, most of the shops here didn't do business with foreigners. In this world, Japan and South Korea were definitely on the top of the list when it came to the self-esteem of a nation. In a small place, they had to add the word big in front of their own ethnic group and country to show that they were different. But compared to South Korea, which was called the Republic of Korea in their bones, in fact, they quite admired the life abroad. Japan was more united. After all, in South Korea, imported cars and foreign tourists were all important resources. But in Japan, to be honest, there were very few people who drove imported cars. Except for some famous cars, Japan's local cars accounted for a large proportion. At the same time, the tourist areas here were also like this. They often didn't do business with foreigners. For foreigners to come to visit, their attitude was also to come. This was also related to the economic environment. Although Japan was not pleasing to the eye, it was the world's second largest economy before the rise of Huaxia. Now that Huaxia had risen, it was also the third. In the afternoon of the day of the fish auction, Jianghai and Prawalton drove a motorcade to Tsukiji Market. This was the first time Jianghai came to Tsukiji Market. After arriving, he found that this market was really arrogant. There was a sign outside the market, which wrote the market's break time. Every Sunday, the whole market was not open. Every morning, there were 2 irregular breaks every month. At the end of the year, there were 3 consecutive breaks. Foreign vehicles must be registered, otherwise, they were not allowed to enter. Taxis were not allowed to enter, and so on. According to Prawalton, she had been here several times. There was not even a parking lot nearby. If they didn't build a Walmart nearby, their car would not have a place to park. Regarding this, Jianghai could only chuckle. He couldn't say anything else. It seems that the Japanese are indeed very xenophobic. The car drove into the nearby Walmart. Jianghai and the others went to the venue first. As soon as they entered, Jianghai saw that his huge Atlantic bluefin tuna had been placed on the exhibition table in the venue. There were ice cubes below to keep it fresh. After looking around, Jianghai didn't have anything to look at, so he was ready to go to Tsukiji Market. Prawalton sent 4 bodyguards to secretly follow, and Jianghai also took Azalina and Wallace Shelley. A group of 7 people came to Tsukiji Market below. As soon as they walked in, Jianghai smelled a fishy smell. Fortunately, Jianghai had long been accustomed to this smell. Walking into the market, Jiang Hai also had to nod. Tsukiji Market was indeed a big market. It could be said that Japan did not prohibit the killing of certain kinds of fish. So in Japan's market, all kinds of marine animals could be seen, including whales, sharks, dolphins, and other things. Of course, these things were dead. Chapter 991. Jiang Hai looked around and was surprised and satisfied with Tsukiji Market. This was because he could find all the fishes in the Pacific Ocean and even the Arctic Ocean. That's right. As long as you are patient, you will be able to find all the fishes in the Pacific Ocean. Almost all kinds of fish can be found here, from big sharks, whales, to small bream, eels, and even some migratory fish. Speaking of salmon, Jiang Hai is very familiar with it. There are a lot of salmon in Bing City. The border between Huaxia and Russia was the Longjiang River. Half of the river belonged to Huaxia, and the other half belonged to Russia. Salmon was one of the fishes in this river. But those who had stayed in Heilongjiang province knew that although half of the river belonged to Huaxia and the other half belonged to Russia, only Huaxia would fish in the river. The Far East region of Russia was vast and sparsely populated. They did not like to eat seafood. In places like Poseidon, those spider crabs and king crabs cost a few hundred RMB per catty in China and 100 renminbi per catty there. Each crab weighed at least 10 catties. This was the difference between Arctic ginseng, Arctic ice prawns, sea urchins, abalones, etc. You can put on a pair of swimming goggles and eat them for free. This was how the Russians viewed the environment. Of course, in recent years, they knew how to fish for these things and sell them to Huaxia. Actually, the average income of the Russians was very low, especially in the Far East region. Huaxia's wine, food, and light industrial products were all for fun. The Far East region of Russia had a total area of 2 million square kilometers, and the population was less than 7 million. Other than some cities, it was really a no man's land. One person had an average of 1 square kilometer of land. Who were you trying to reason with? It was because the Russians did not fish that there were very few people in Huaxia, but there were a lot of fishes in Russia. Therefore, in the past few years, there would often be some Huaxia fishermen who would take advantage of the night to fish for fish. However, this was considered an invasion of the other party's territory. The other party's soldiers had to shoot. So many fishermen died at the border. And these fishermen exchanged their lives for these salmon. When these salmon arrived in Huaxia, it depended on how you sold them. If you sold them as salmon, then you made a profit. After all, these salmon were pure wild. It was no problem to fool laymen. But if you sold them as salmon, then they weren't worth much. However, there was an exception, and that was the salmon roe. In China, the caviar made from salmon roe was quite popular. However, except for some countries in Asia, other Western countries wouldn't eat salmon roe. Here, we have to talk about another specialty of Soviet Russia, black caviar. Speaking of caviar, perhaps everyone knew a little about it, but to be honest, they didn't know much about it, including Jiang Hai. He didn't know much about it before, and he wasn't very clear about it now because his family didn't breed these things. But when he was at the auction, he saw 10 kilograms of black caviar priced at $50,000. He was a little surprised. Nakamura, who knew that Jiang Hai was a VIP, also introduced the black caviar to Jiang Hai. In fact, most people called caviar caviar. In fact, this was wrong. Only the caviar of 3 kinds of fish could be made in a caviar. They were the beluga paddlefish, the osietra paddlefish, and the sevruga paddlefish. Only the caviar of these 3 kinds of paddlefish was called caviar. The others, including the Chinese paddlefish's caviar, weren't called caviar caviar. It had nothing to do with preciousness, value, or size. Only these 3 kinds of caviar were the best. Caviar was sold for $860 per kilogram in Soviet Russia. In London, the best caviar was sold for $5,000 per kilogram. It was precisely because of this that many places in Europe raised paddlefish. However, the more troublesome thing about raising paddlefish was that once the caviar was taken out, the fish would die. Moreover, paddlefish grew very slowly. It would take at least 4 or 5 years to harvest. It was precisely because of this that raising paddlefish in China wasn't very good. First, it was because it couldn't be sold at a high price. In the eyes of the people in China, caviar could be made into caviar. This was simply a difference in perception because people in China weren't so keen on eating caviar. For example, foie gras was the best in Europe, but there weren't many people eating it in China. There was no market, so naturally, it couldn't be sold at a high price. Second, because the growth cycle was too long, not many people had the patience to spend 5 or 6 years to raise paddlefish. This was really not worth it. Third, it was really troublesome to take out the caviar. There was no such organization in China. In order to extract the sturgeon's eggs, the sturgeon had to be knocked out first, but it couldn't be killed because if the mother died, the eggs would be finished. Then, the fish roe was quickly taken out, screened, washed, and filtered, and handed to an appraiser to identify its grade. Then, the size, color, fullness, density, and smell of the fish roe were evaluated. Finally, salt was added, and the fish roe was marinated into fish roe sauce. This was also the most demanding of craftsmanship. The salt could not be too much or too little. The taste of the salt could not overpower the original taste, but the fish roe must have a slight taste of salt to form a subtle combination. After the salt was added, the fish roe had to be shaken on a strainer until the skin of the fish roe was dehydrated. Every grain had to be separated, which meant that they were dried. Then, they were canned and shipped all over the world. All these steps only took 15 minutes, which meant that they had to be done within 15 minutes. Otherwise, the caviar would be ruined. It was precisely because of this strict system that the caviar was so expensive. In fact, the main issue was a matter of values. For example, Jiang Hai's beef. Someone had said that Jiang Hai's thoughts were not right. Why should he sell good things overseas and not to his own people? Good beef was sold overseas, and good fish was also sold in China. Jiang Hai's thoughts were not right. He was kneeling down and licking the feet of foreigners. He was wrong, but generally, Jiang Hai did not even bother with people who said such things. The simplest question was, Jiang Hai's beef was sold in China. Who would buy it? For example, the housewives went to the supermarket. It didn't matter which city it was, whether it was in the Northeast, Beijing, or Shanghai. It didn't matter where it was. They went to Walmart and saw Jiang Hai's beef at Sam's Club. It was 2,400 renminbi per caddy. Would you buy it? Other people's salmon was sold for more than 30 renminbi per caddy, but Jiang Hai's was sold for 300 renminbi per caddy. Would you buy it? This was not including the shipping fees and customs duties. Anyone who had thoughts would say, why should I buy it? The best beef in China was selling cucumber strips for 40 renminbi, but Jiang Hai's beef was sold for 2,400 renminbi. A normal white-collar worker's monthly salary was not enough to buy 2 caddies of meat. It was simply unrealistic. The concept of consumption in the country had not improved. If you told them how delicious the beef was, they would not listen. This was because, to them, the beef was the same. The only difference was the fat, lean, and location. The selling price was also different. In fact, this was also the case. What was the difference between Wagyu's beef and ordinary beef? The nutrition was the same, and it was easy to eat. But Wagyu's beef and fish were sold at a high price. Jiang Hai's beef and fish were also sold at a high price. These are not for ordinary people. Only a few rich people in China knew about these things. That was why Wagyu could only sell his beef overseas. Thinking about the huge imperial capital, Jiang Hai and Qi Li's 4 stores had already taken all the consumer groups. How many people were there in the entire imperial capital? Jiang Hai wanted to sell his beef overseas, but no one would buy it. Hey, what are you thinking about? Are you in a daze? Just when Jiang Hai was sighing with emotion in his heart, Azalina could not help but gently pat Jiang Hai's shoulder and whisper. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also reacted. Oh, nothing. I was just in a daze for a while. Jiang Hai smiled. He could not say that he was thinking so much unintentionally, so he could only smile and say to Azalina, some things were better left in his heart. If there's nothing else, I think we should go back. I feel that someone is watching us. Hearing Azalina's words, Jiang Hai also looked around. Sure enough, when he looked at them, many people immediately looked away and pretended to buy things. Looking at these people, Jiang Hai smiled. He did not know who these people were, but he was sure that these people definitely did not have good intentions. So he slowly walked towards the Walmart. The 4 Prowalton bodyguards, who were originally scattered around, also walked to Jiang Hai's side under Azalina's command. With the help of the crowd around him, Jiang Hai and the others quickly walked into the Walmart. After entering, they were relieved. At this time, the people outside also dispersed and pretended to walk around, but their eyes looked at Jiang Hai from time to time. Looking at their eyes, Jiang Hai also smiled. It would be strange if he was not stared at. You are done. Just in time, almost everyone is here. It will start in a while. Seeing Jiang Hai coming back, Prowalton was almost done with his work. Then he smiled and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai also looked around. When he left, there was no one except the staff, but when he came back, there were almost 20 or 30 strangers in the room. Basically, they were all Japanese. They gathered in 2s and 3s and chatted. Looking at these people, Jiang Hai could not help but smile. These guys are all his customers. Almost everyone is here. I don't think anyone will come. Are you ready to start? At this time, Nakamura walked to the side of Jiang Hai and Prowalton and asked Prowalton, let's start at the scheduled time. Hearing Nakamura's words, Prowalton also nodded. A good show is about to begin. Chapter 992. Everyone, it's almost time. Please take your seats. Seeing that it was almost time, Nakamura walked to the front of the stage and bowed to the crowd while inviting them to their seats. These people were also here for the big fish. Naturally, they wouldn't be rash and went to sit down. Jiang Hai and Prowalton sat in the distance, watching the situation of these people. They naturally wouldn't drive up the price, but it was still necessary to come and watch. Soon, the auction began under the auspices of Nakamura. It wasn't the first time Jiang Hai participated in this thing, so he naturally didn't care very much. He just sat there and watched. This time, the auction was basically some marine products, such as the 10 kilograms of blackfish roe, just now. In addition, there were some other tunas, yellowfin, and bluefin. These were all collected by Prowalton. Then there were some huge crabs, lobsters, and the like. Of course, each of them had to be more than 40 kilograms in size. Otherwise, there was no need to auction them. After all, the lobsters in Jiang Hai's manor were more than 30 kilograms in size. The speed of the auction was very fast. In less than an hour, most of the items had been sold. 90% of the items had found their owners. Only Malu fish was sold. Although this fish was very big, the price was obviously a bit high. After all, this was not a very rare fish. Other than that, the other items have been sold. Next, we will proceed to the last item of the auction, which is this bluefin tuna. Here is the fish's information. Length, weight, meat quality is rated S grade. Although it's not the spring auction, we all know why this thing exists. Next, let's begin the auction of this tuna. The starting price is $600,000, and each bid must not be less than $50,000. Begin. As soon as Nakamura finished speaking, an old man raised his hand. 1 million. After the old man raised his hand, he slowly shouted a number. Of course, this record-breaking tuna was not only worth this price. The old man did this to tell those small businesses that this fish was not something they could covet. This is Ono Toshio, the oldest 3-star Michelin chef in the world, the son of Ono Jiro. He is also the president of the current 3-star Michelin restaurant, Sukiya Hashiro. Seeing this man raise his hand, Prowalton also introduced him to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai has heard of this person before, the legendary god of sushi, but Jiang Hai himself doesn't eat raw, and most of the sushi is raw. Jiang Hai doesn't like vegetarians, so he is not interested in this restaurant. $2 million. At this time, a middle-aged man with glasses raised his hand. This is the person in charge of Kanda cuisine. Looking at the middle-aged man, Prowalton also said to Jiang Hai, Kanda. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also glanced at her. What's the situation with this Kanda? Kanda is also a 3-star Michelin restaurant. There are a total of 13 3-star Michelin restaurants in Tokyo, so Michelin also rated Tokyo as the city of gourmet. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton introduced with a smile. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai shrugged. The rating of Chinese and foreigners are still different. 5 million. At this time, a foreigner raised his hand and said to the person next to him with a smile, "This is the executive chef of Quintessence, which is also a 3-star Michelin restaurant, but he is a chef." Seeing this person, Prawalton also introduced him, but Jiang Hai was a little confused. Why is a chef snatching the tuna? Is he just here to raise the price? In fact, this is indeed the case. He only called it once, and he didn't call it again. Then Saito's sushi restaurant bid 7 million, and Sagaya's sushi restaurant bid 85 million, and then the price increase gradually dropped. After all, although this fish is definitely worth more than $2 million, who doesn't want to spend less money to buy it? However, although the price increase is not so scary, the speed of the price increase has not stopped, and it slowly increased to 2 million. Why are all the people who buy this fish from sushi restaurants? Looking at these people in front of him, Jiang Hai asked Prawalton with some doubts. Then Prawalton also introduced the situation of Japanese cuisine to Jiang Hai. In China, if there is any shop that makes money, it must be the seafood restaurant, but it is different in Japan. This was because the most profitable restaurant in Japan was the sushi restaurant. It was because the people in Japan really liked eating sushi. And sushi mainly depends on the craftsmanship, followed by the materials. Their biggest requirement is the freshness of the materials. How much can rice be worth? How much can kelp be worth? The most expensive thing is the small piece of fish on top. If you went to those famous sushi restaurants to eat, 20,000 to 30,000 yen per person would be like playing around. And this was under the condition that you didn't order anything expensive and just wanted to eat until you were full. Under such circumstances, you may not be able to arrange a meal in these restaurants half a month later. Besides, no one will be so stingy when it came to eating sushi in these restaurants. 50,000 yen per person wasn't that expensive. Serving 200 people a day would cost 10 million yen, which was nearly $100,000. That would be 3 million in a month's income. This is assuming that you don't eat anything too expensive, such as this tuna. This tuna is worth tens of thousands of yen, not to mention the meat on the cheeks, just the belly and the middle belly. Even if they buy this fish for $3 million, they can definitely earn it back. Just as the sushi restaurants over there were increasing the price by 10,000 or 20,000, suddenly a voice sounded. 75 million. As the voice sounded, everyone looked at the source of the voice. At that time, many sushi restaurants sighed. They knew that they couldn't compete this time. The person they looked at was a man in his early 60s. This man has a square face. At this time, he was looking at the fish on the stage with a smile, as if this fish is in his pocket. This man is Kiyoshi Kimura, and he's the most likely person to buy our fish this time. Looking at this man, Prawalton introduced him to Jiang Hai, and Jiang Hai was also looking at this man, but Jiang Hai felt that this man doesn't seem to be a chef. He is indeed not a chef, he is a chairman. When he was young, he set up the Haidai Village Company, but Haidai Village is just a company. This company mainly has 2 brands. One is Haidai Sushi, and the other is Samadhi Sushi. Although these 2 sushi are not rated in Michelin, they are the 2 most popular sushi restaurants in Japan. Among them, Samadhi Sushi is open 24 hours a day, and the income in Japan is quite considerable. It is precisely because of this that these sushi restaurants can't compete with this real entrepreneur. Hearing Prawalton mention Haidai Village, Jiang Hai nodded. He also knew about Haidai Village. He used to look up information about bluefin tuna in China, and there was also an introduction of this company. Basically, the Fish King was finally won by this company, and it was indeed very strong. Seeing this man join the competition, 90% of the sushi restaurants gave up. In the end, the Saito family, who was also very rich, added another $20,000, making it $77 million. But then it was overshadowed by Kiyoshi Kimura's 2 $85 million. When this price appeared, it meant that the auction was over. The original price of this fish was about $7 million, and now it was sold for $150,000 more, which was good news. The moment Nakamura dropped the hammer, this newly recorded fish belonged to Kiyoshi Kimura of Haidai Village. He also stood up and accepted the congratulations of the people in the sushi shops around him. His samadhi sushi mainly sells tuna, which is tuna, so he is determined to get this thing. With the end of the auction, everyone left one by one. At this time, Nakamura came to Jianghai and Prawalton, smiling as he reported the results of the auction to them. The main purpose of the auction was not to sell these fish, but to promote Walmart. At the same time, it was to tell the sushi restaurants that Walmart would be selling high-end seafood in the future. In Japan, regulars were very important. Japan was a nostalgic country. Compared to China or the US, quality was the most important factor. The quality of the people here was one thing, but more importantly, they were nostalgic. For example, if a person always went to a convenience store near his home to buy things, even if the things in the convenience store were more expensive than other places, as long as the things were similar, he would always come back to buy things. The same is true for these sushi restaurants. They all have familiar suppliers. If they want them to come and buy fish, they need this auction to let them know the quality of Walmart's fish. To be exact, they need to know the quality of Jianghai's fish. Sushi restaurants have extremely strict requirements for quality. Leaving them with such an idea would be even more beneficial for Jianghai's seafood to enter the Japanese market. This can be regarded as opening a new market for Jianghai seafood. By the way, the president of Haidai Village, Mr. Kimura, hopes to invite Miss Jianghai and Mr. Jiang to dinner. After finishing the business, Nakamura said to Jianghai and Prawalton. Hearing his words, Jianghai shook his head. Maybe I can't eat this meal, and I have to go quickly, because those people have been eyeing me. Thinking of the feeling of being stared at in Tsukiji Market just now, Jianghai said seriously, and Prawalton heard his words, also became serious. Chapter 993. Hearing Jianghai's words, Prawalton's face changed color in an instant. She had told Jianghai before she came that she would be responsible for his safety. Now if there was an accident, she would be a sinner. Not to mention others, she herself would not forgive herself. So now that Jianghai said that they were being watched, she immediately called and sent more bodyguards in a plane, ready to take off at any time. I still have some finishing work here in Japan. After sending you on the plane, I will stay here for a few days. Is it okay for you to go back by yourself? Looking at Jianghai, Prawalton said seriously. Of course, there's no problem. Hearing her words, Jianghai smiled. He wanted to go back, it was his business. He couldn't let Prawalton delay his work and send him back. After hearing the words of the two, Nakamura respectfully retreated. He naturally knew who wanted to deal with Jianghai, the Akita family, but he didn't say it. He knew that as a dog, he couldn't murder his master, but if his master didn't ask him, then he wouldn't say much. So he just respectfully retreated, and then went to tell Kiyoshi Kimura that Jianghai had an urgent matter and had to return to the United States soon. This meal could only be arranged next time, but he wanted to buy the contract of high-level fish, which was not a problem. Soon Prawalton's bodyguards were sent, and then Jianghai and Prawalton left here together with Azalina and Wallace Shelley and went to the airport. Looking at such a motorcade, the people who were watching outside quickly retreated. Kidding, they knew that these people were not to be trifled with. They would not provoke such bad luck. Although the bounty was good, one had to be alive to spend it. At least from their point of view, it was very inappropriate. Perhaps it was because of the deterrence effect of the large number of people. Jianghai and the others didn't encounter any accidents on their way to the Haneda airport, although their speed was very slow. After arriving at the Haneda airport, Jianghai and the others boarded the plane that was arranged by Pra Walton. After sending off Jianghai, they came back to pick up Pra Walton. As soon as they boarded the plane, the stewardesses looked at Jianghai with sparkling eyes. They remembered that he was the only man they could come into contact with during the contract period. Naturally, they were quite interested in Jianghai. As the plane took off, Jianghai heaved a sigh of relief. To be honest, he did not have a good impression of Japan. The people here looked humble, but they were actually extremely arrogant and xenophobic. At least, Jianghai didn't like them. But it was estimated that in the future, just like South Korea, he would not be able to come here often. Putting down the unhappiness in his heart, Jianghai looked at the 10 stewardesses who reappeared after the plane stabilized. Needless to say, it was another big battle. These 10 hours of flight time would not be wasted. At this time, in the Akita family's mansion, after learning that Jianghai had boarded the plane, the Akita family was furious. It had nothing to do with Jianghai, and Prawalton was not someone the small Akita family could afford to offend. So Prawalton Jianghai didn't have to worry. After about 10 hours of flight, Prawalton's plane landed at the airport in Boston. Jianghai, who had already contacted his home through the satellite phone, saw Sala waiting outside the airport with his shield for a long time when he got off the plane. After bidding farewell to the 10 stewardesses who were reluctant to leave, Jianghai got in the car and rushed in the direction of his home. After returning to the manor and nestling on the sofa in the living room, Jianghai couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He could finally relax. Qi Jie and the others knew that Jianghai was back, so they all rushed back from outside. Don't get me wrong, it didn't go out of play. It was because it was already March, and it was time to start planting. Not only were the vegetables and fruits in the greenhouse going to be planted, but the grapes were also going to be planted. Even Jianghai's tea trees were almost ready to be harvested. Spring, the recovery of all things, was naturally the busiest season. Everyone in Jianghai's manor was very busy. When they came back, their bodies and hair were covered with weeds and mud, but Jianghai still hugged each of them and told them that he was back. As for Tajira, she was still in school. After returning home to rest for 2 days, Jianghai also joined the pace of spring plowing. But this time, there were Qi Jie, Chia, Ai Xiaoxi, Feng Yinshun, Azalina, Wallace Shelley, Ale, Sarah, and the wives of Jianghai's subordinates in the manor, who were also the aunties. They didn't need Jianghai's help, because they had already designed the vegetables to be planted this year. Brussels sprouts, radishes, carrots, celery, chives, ginger, eggplants, peppers, cucumbers, zucchini, pumpkins, winter gourds, bitter gourds, peas, broad beans, leeks, onions, daylilies, garlic, and so on. There were a total of 20 or 30 kinds of vegetables. Fortunately, the vegetable field in the greenhouse that Jianghai originally opened was big enough, otherwise it would really be impossible to plant them. The most important one was tomatoes. This year, Qi was going to make her own tomato sauce. Just this thing alone was nearly 1 mu of land. According to the calculation of the yield of 7,000 kilograms per mu, this was 7 tons of tomatoes, which was enough for the consumption of the people in Jianghai's manor. In addition to these vegetables, there were also a lot of fruits, which Jianghai had also introduced, so there was no need to say more here. In addition to vegetables and fruits, Jianghai also planted a lot of tea trees. Now, the tea trees had already sprouted, but Jianghai hadn't picked them yet. He was going to pick them at the end of March. As for the vineyard, because it had a good start last year, in March this year, Dulles Gerard pulled Aphrodite and the others over to start planting grapes. Therefore, Aphrodite and the others were now very busy. Needless to say, the cowboys and fishermen were recovering. Animals were also recovering. Edward Anderson and the others were now watching the cows in the manor breeding. After all, there were too many cows in the manor, and there was more than one breeding cow. Naturally, the bred cows couldn't be bred again, and they couldn't be allowed to have conflicts. Every cow had to be divided, which was the biggest role of the cows. The fishermen were also very busy because the new fry were sent over. When the fry entered the water, they had to sprinkle a lot of bait every day to let the fry stay in their manor. Jianghai didn't even have a purse seine, so naturally, he had to use this method. Therefore, when everyone was very busy, there were only 2 idle people left in the manor. One was Jianghai, and the other was Knerson Peters. Jianghai studied for a while and found that everyone was very busy, so it wasn't good for him to be idle. Therefore, he planned to go and plant the grass seeds in the burned pasture and then go and open up 2 mu of paddy fields. He still had a lot of rice seeds here. Although he hadn't planted them before, he still had to study them. But before that, he had to plant the pasture first. The pasture seeds were easy to find. Jiang Hai had already ordered them a long time ago. With just a phone call, all the pasture seeds that could be planted in the wasteland came. Then, Jiang Hai soaked the seeds in water. Then, about 1 million of them released spiritual energy. Don't think that this ratio is very high. Jiang Hai's new manor had a total land area of 15,000 mu. 1 mu was equivalent to 6 mu of land, which was 90,000 mu of land. About 200,000 to 3,000 plants would be planted in 1 mu, which was a total of 270 million plants. It would consume 270 strands of spiritual energy from Jiang Hai, and 1 strand of spiritual energy from 1 million grass seeds was already a lot. After consuming the spiritual energy, Jiang Hai and Immerse Peters wouldn't wait for the grass seeds to germinate before planting them. Instead, after soaking the seeds, they would pull them to the pasture the next day and directly throw them away. Then, they would pour the water that contained spiritual energy on the land. Don't think that Jiang Hai's way of doing things would cause the grass to grow badly. In fact, with spiritual energy, it was better to raise them like this. In just one night, these grass seeds would be planted in the ground, take root, and slowly grow. According to the calculation of 10 strands of spiritual energy a day, Jiang Hai was very tired these days. Basically, the spiritual energy that he recovered every day was added to these things. It was said that Jiang Hai didn't upgrade because he couldn't make ends meet. For a whole March, Jiang Hai's manor was very busy. Of course, other people were also very busy. For example, Prawalton also returned to the United States a few days ago. She specially came to Jiang Hai's place to stay for 3 days, not only to renew the old friendship with Jiang Hai, but also to tell Jiang Hai about the situation in Japan. Since the end of the tuna auction, on the 3rd day, she transported 2 planes of seafood to Japan to test the market. As a result, as soon as the fish was placed on the table, they were directly divided by those sushi restaurants. Jiang Hai's fish, no matter what kind of fish, according to the industry's internal words, the meat quality was all S or even S+, but there was no S+, but Jiang Hai's fish was indeed better than the average S-rated fish. The taste was more delicious, fresh, and sweet, and the meat quality was more compact. It could be said that it was quite delicious, especially when making sushi, which made the business of these shops unknowingly increase by 20%. This time, Jiang Hai's seafood officially entered the Japanese market. Of course, many of the original Japanese were also very popular. However, Jiang Hai could only say that they were unlucky. What a joke! Jiang Hai was still quite confident about his fish. The rest of March also ended in this busy period. Jiang Hai's grassland was finally ready. Next, he would study his new idea of planting rice, but before that, his tea should be collected. Chapter 994. Remember, don't pull, don't pull, don't pull, don't pull, don't do that. You have to use your thumbnail to pinch the root. Only then can it be considered plucked. Jiang Hai looked at Delina, Marion, Taraga, and Taraga's 2 classmates, Pelselzi and Bessie Oliver, and said seriously, "Like this." Hearing his words, Pelsirsi also gave it a try. He pinched a sprout and handed it to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai took it and looked at it. Although there were some flaws, it was already pretty good. "Yes, like this. Come on, girls, let's get to work. Do well. I'll give you $50 an hour. You can eat the best beef and fish here for lunch and dinner." Jiang Hai clapped his hands and said to the 5 girls behind him. Of course, he was mainly talking to Taraga's 2 classmates. "Wow, this is great. I can buy the latest clothes now. I want to change my shoes too." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the 2 girls shouted excitedly. Looking at them, Jiang Hai signaled them to start working. Under Jiang Hai's gaze, the 5 girls quickly scattered in front of the tea trees nearby and carefully picked the buds. Jiang Hai didn't like to drink tea before. There weren't many young people who liked to drink tea. Most people liked to drink cola, Sprite, Fanta, and the like. They didn't drink carbonated drinks. They also liked to drink soy milk, fruit juice, and the like. Jiang Hai was the same. He liked cola, but he only drank delicious ones. He didn't drink Pepsi because he felt that Pepsi didn't taste good. Of course, for most people, the taste was actually the same. But ever since he got the tea leaves from Zhang Hai and found that the tea leaves could increase his spiritual energy, he basically never left the tea leaves. Gradually, he found that drinking tea was actually very good. It nourished the body and made people feel very comfortable, especially the tea leaves that he planted with spiritual energy. The taste and the feeling, it was hard to describe, but it would make people feel as if their pores were expelling waste gas, making people feel very energetic. So this year, when he picked the tea leaves, he paid more attention to it. As for the tea leaves that he bought, to be honest, Jiang Hai didn't like them very much. Jiang Hai also spread the word here. If someone liked tea, they could make a cup now and see if there was a layer of oil on the tea leaves. Some people would say that it was the oil that was added when frying tea leaves. In fact, this was nonsense. There was a kind of oil called tea oil. The tea leaves themselves contained oil, so there was no need to add oil when frying vegetables. The oil was actually a pesticide. Because the amount was small, it wouldn't be a big deal if people drank it, but it certainly wouldn't be good for them. Jiang Hai didn't drink this kind of tea because it was sprayed with pesticides. These pesticide residues were very destructive to spiritual energy. The real good tea leaves were divided into pre-Ming Ming tea and pre-Ming Yu tea. If it wasn't these two tea leaves, then it was relatively bad. Pre-Ming Ming tea leaves were picked before the Qingming festival, and pre-Ming Yu tea leaves were picked after the Qingming festival and before the Guyu tea leaves. The tea leaves after the Guyu tea leaves were very bad in the eyes of insiders. It was the same no matter how good the taste was, because after the Guyu tea leaves were sprayed with pesticides. Why did they have to be sprayed with pesticides? Because if they weren't sprayed with pesticides, they would have worms. And how to distinguish whether the tea was pre-Ming Ming tea or pre-Ming Yu tea leaves? It was to see if there was a layer of oil when it was soaked. If there was, then it was fake. If there wasn't, then it was real. Of course, it couldn't be ruled out that some people had sprayed the tea leaves before the Qingming festival. Jiang Hai didn't know much about such tea leaves. He could only say that they were willing to do so, and Jiang Hai couldn't do anything about it. Among the tea leaves sold in the market, take Longjing tea as an example. This was also Jiang Hai's favorite tea leaves. The best tea leaves were naturally from Westlake. What Lion Peak, Maijiawu, and so on were considered the most ordinary ones. But even the most ordinary ones were basically not available. Other than that, Zhejiang's Longjing tea and Hangzhou's Longjing tea were actually not bad. But no matter which of the three Longjing tea leaves, even if they were from the Qingming festival, the cheapest pre-Ming Ming tea leaves would cost at least 600 yuan per caddy. If there was a promotion, the price of 500 yuan per caddy could also be real. For example, if you soak the tea leaves that cost more than 100 yuan per caddy, or 200 to 300 yuan per caddy, it would definitely be oily. Moreover, the tea leaves wouldn't have a strong bean fragrance. Looking at the 5 girls working hard in front of him, Jiang Hai watched for a while before leaving. He went to find Immerse and Peters, who had already been prepared. When Jiang Hai was looking for him, he was doing push-ups in front of his house. Seeing Jiang Hai coming over, Immerse and Peters signaled Jiang Hai to wait for a moment with his eyes. Then, he sped up his exercise. Immerse and Peters had been living quite well recently. Back then, he was also a person with a hard life. Because he was big and strong, he was tricked by some of his so-called friends into doing underground boxing. Then he was hit by a car. Fortunately, he wasn't destined to die. Jiang Hai first treated him to a hamburger, then paid for his medical expenses and saved his life. Although this person was a little stubborn, he knew very well what it meant to repay kindness. So after he recovered from his injuries, he came to Boston to find Jiang Hai. In the end, he mistakenly entered a bandit gang. Fortunately, after he found out that his enemy was his benefactor, he directly changed sides. It could be considered a great help to Jiang Hai. Then, he stayed in the manor. However, when he stayed in the manor, he always felt that he didn't have much of a presence. He wanted to be Jiang Hai's bodyguard to protect his safety, but the problem was that in the manor, his strength was really not very high. Baal was stronger than him, and Azalina and the other women were also stronger than him. Therefore, he was somewhat injured. He always thought that his presence was low because he was too weak. Therefore, he trained as if his life depended on it. Fortunately, he was in Jiang Hai's manor. He ate Jiang Hai's beef and fish every day, and the aura in his body helped him recover from his crippling training. On the contrary, it made him stronger and stronger. In the absence of any protein powder, his body and strength were no weaker than those strong men, or even stronger. But recently, he felt that he was finally useful. Although Jiang Hai didn't ask him to protect himself, he was working with Jiang Hai, sowing grass seeds. After sowing grass seeds for a month, it was obvious that he and Jiang Hai were much closer. "Boss, what are we doing today?" After finishing the 3,000 push-ups, Knursen Peters stood up, patted the dirt off his hands, and looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. In his opinion, working with Jiang Hai every day was the happiest thing for him. Of course, he wasn't gay. He just felt that he was useful. Baal asked him to go out and donate to some special professional women, and he was very happy. Of course, Harriman Fells was also very happy. "Today, we're going to level a piece of land and prepare to make a paddy field." Jiang Hai had said that he wanted to build a paddy field, so he would do it. Although he hadn't done it before, he could look it up, right? Jiang Hai didn't know much about rice farming, but according to a domestic encyclopedia, it was nothing more than the above steps. First, they had to level a piece of land and make it soft, then plow it. Next, they had to soak the rice seedlings with water. Jiang Hai had the help of spiritual energy, so these were all trivial matters. Then, they had to transplant the rice seedlings, which was the most tiring. However, Jiang Hai didn't have to go through so much trouble. He borrowed a rice transplanter. Who was Jiang Hai? Although Jiang Hai only planted 2 mu of land, some people took the initiative to lend their transplanters to him. Therefore, Jiang Hai didn't have to worry about these trivial matters. Then it was time to get rid of the insects and weeds, because Jiang Hai was only going to get 2 mu of land. After that, it was time to fertilize the land. There was spiritual energy, so Jiang Hai didn't need to do it himself. Thinking about it, Jiang Hai's heart still couldn't get over it. Finally, they had to irrigate and drain. This could also be done by machines, so Jiang Hai didn't need to worry about it. After knowing all the steps, Jiang Hai and Knursen Peters went to the riverside, which was the man-made river. This way, irrigation and pumping would be easy, and the man-made river wouldn't have any problems with rising water. After all, it was directly connected to the sea. Jiang Hai picked a piece of flat land, about 2 mu of land. There were many places in Jiang Hai's land, but there were a lot of flat land. Jiang Hai and Knursen Peters began to shovel the turf. Jiang Hai wanted to dig a hole in the 2 mu of land. It didn't need to be too deep, about half a meter would be enough. The roots of the grass weren't that deep, so it saved them the trouble of weeding. Then, they could use a fence or something to build a circle around it. There were very few stones in Jiang Hai's land, so it saved them a lot of trouble. In addition, the 2 of them had great strength. After a few shovels, the hole was already half a meter deep. Then, they continued to dig. In the morning, Jiang Hai and Knursen Peters had already finished about a quarter of the project. At noon, Chia and the others had already prepared lunch. Jiang Hai and Delina, who had been busy all morning, had a delicious meal together. Taraga's 2 classmates, Pel Searcy and Bessie Oliver, who ate the beef and fish from Jiang Hai's manor for the first time. Their eyes almost popped out. This was the first time they had eaten such delicious food. Most importantly, there was no limit. After resting for 2 hours at noon, everyone divided the work and began to work again. In the afternoon, Jiang Hai and Knursen Peters had almost finished 1 mu of land. Just as the sky was turning dark and they were about to go back, they saw Robbins Garcia running towards them with a net. Looking at his serious face, Jiang Hai couldn't help but stop. What happened? Chapter 995. Boss, these fish have started to lay eggs. Walking in front of Jiang Hai, Edward Anderson couldn't help but open the net in his hand with some excitement. Inside, there were a few lively fishes. Chong Jiang Dao, have they finally started to lay eggs? Seeing these fish, Jiang Hai's serious expression relaxed. He then quickly ran to the river not far away. Sure enough, a large number of long-jawed centipedes swam from Jiang Hai's coastal area into the artificial river built by Jiang Hai against the current. They stopped and wandered at a river bend specially built by him. Some fish were looking for a place to lay eggs, while others were looking for food. The spiritual energy in Jiang Hai's area was very developed. Although he intended to kill insects and raised a lot of chickens, the vitality of insect was very strong. In addition, Jiang Hai didn't spray any pesticide at all. Therefore, there were still many insects in Jiang Hai's manor, both beneficial and harmful. These aquatic insects became the absolute nutrients in Jiang Hai's freshwater river. Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh when he saw the long-jawed centipedes swarming towards him. In fact, as long as this kind of fish multiplied, it would be very difficult for them to go extinct. This was because this kind of fish was different from swimming fish, such as chumha, in that they wouldn't die after laying eggs. Instead, they would stay in the river for a period of time before returning to the sea. They would come back next year or the year after to lay eggs. This kind of fish could be found all over the world, but it was almost extinct in Huaxia. It was because this kind of fish was in short supply. In Jiang Hai's eyes, the originally clear river water was now very muddy because of these fish. However, Jiang Hai kept laughing. Each pair of these fish could lay 30,000 to 40,000 eggs. This way, after next year, he could harvest without worry. Thinking about the price of this kind of thing in China, Jiang Hai could only laugh. He had nothing else to say. In Jiang Hai's eyes, the half-catty long-jawed centipedes were not fish, but swimming gold bricks. Yes, gold bricks, not gold bars. They were much more expensive than gold bars. According to my estimation, almost 90,000 of the 100,000 long-jawed centipedes that were originally raised are now alive. If all of them migrate, our river may not be able to withstand it. We should catch some of them. But after catching them, how to sell them and where to sell them, boss, you have to decide. Looking at Jiang Hai squatting here and laughing foolishly, Edward Anderson frowned and said somewhat helplessly, "When the river was first built, it was calculated based on the fact that 30% of the fish could survive. Moreover, it was specially built wider because it was afraid that there would be more fish. Therefore, it was calculated to be more than twice the size. That is, 60,000 fish could swim back to build the river." However, who knew that this time 90,000 fish would come back at once? An extra 10,000 fish would be fine, but 20,000 fish would be dangerous. Jiang Hai only saw the gold bricks, but he didn't notice that these guys would also destroy the original ecological balance in the river. Hee, is this a happy trouble? I'll find a place for them right away. Hearing Edward Anderson's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. Then, he immediately went to the shore and called Chi Li. Jiang Hai and Chi Li called almost every day. Sometimes they would even text and WeChat every 1 or 2 days. At this time, the sky was already dark in Jiang Hai's place. It was almost 6 o'clock in the morning, but in the capital, it was only 7 o'clock in the morning. Chi Li and Du Ning had just woken up. The two were eating breakfast while Chi Li was looking at the report in her hand. This was the report of the previous quarter, which was January, February, and March. It was only the beginning of April now, so it was naturally handed in at this time. Since the integration of the Qi group, the results were quite good. Currently, the Qi group had a total of 3 industries. One of them was real estate. There was nothing much to say about this. With the increasing difficulty of land approvals, the Qi group was more of a leader. They were no longer involved in real estate. Now was not the golden time for real estate. The second was the 4 Western restaurants of Jiang Hai and Chi Li, which were also the most stable income. With Jiang Hai's beef and seafood as the signboard, these 4 Western restaurants were quite famous in the capital. Since public funds were not allowed to eat and drink, many domestic seafood restaurants had closed down. There was no other way. The officials did not come, and those businessmen would not stay here every day. This was the reality. However, for Jiang Hai and Chi Li's Western restaurants, the impact was almost zero because the officials did not eat Western food. If you asked them to sit there and cut steak and drink red wine, they would not be used to it. Therefore, the people who came to eat in Jiang Hai's restaurant were basically some senior white-collar workers, some gold-collar workers, some second-generation rich people, and so on. These people were not short of money. Jiang Hai's restaurant could be said to be the restaurant with the best quality in the country. Of course, it had nothing to do with the chef. Jiang Hai gave the restaurant the best ingredients. Therefore, the income was quite stable. Jiang Hai was also very happy about this. The more this business made, the more he would earn. The third was the electronics industry. Originally, in order to transform, the Qi Group had acquired some factories in the electronics industry. However, Chile originally only wanted to do some venture capital or resell. But at the end of last year, after Jiang Hai became a shareholder of Google's 1% shares, everything changed. With his lead, they could invite some senior researchers from Google to those factories to study some systems or some high-tech things. After this period of integration, the Qi Group's electronics technology had now been integrated into a whole branch company. The main research was advertising, online software, application software, mobile device planning, and the development of the Android system. The first one might be easier to understand, but the last one might be more difficult to understand. For example, for a domestic mobile phone brand, the company wanted to develop an application similar to Android, but it was their own company's application system. However, it was too difficult and troublesome to do this by themselves. At this time, they could look for the Qi Group Electronics. They would do it according to their requirements. In addition, Android itself was Google's. They could also cut into the internal code to make it better and more beautiful. These companies would fully entrust the Qi Group Electronics to do the system's maintenance, and so on. This was also a very good income, although because they had just started and only one was sold, they could still see some profit. Looking at these reports, Chile couldn't help but smile. She felt that the time of her being a hands-off boss was getting closer and closer. But at this time, Jiang Hai's phone call came. Looking at the photo of the call, Chile couldn't help but smile. "Hey, how did you know that I was thinking of you? Why did you call me?" After picking up the phone, Chile said sweetly to Jiang Hai. In the eyes of this woman, the most important thing was to revitalize the Qi Group, and the second most important thing was Jiang Hai. When these two things were tied together, she was very happy every day. I miss you too. I want to make more money for you to spend." Hearing Chi Li's words, Jiang Hai casually took out a long-jawed catfish from the net pocket and looked at it while speaking to Chi Li. You really know how to talk. Tell me, what is the way to make more money?" Hearing what Jiang Hai said, Chi Li said with a smile. Although Jiang Hai is a bit of a playboy, for Chi Li, it's not a big deal. She has accepted it in her heart. So for Jiang Hai's sweet words, she is quite happy. The long-jawed catfish has grown up. After Jiang Hai finished speaking, he sent a photo to Chi Li. After Chi Li received the photo, her pupils dilated instantly. As the helmsman of the Qi Group, she is naturally very familiar with this thing. Thinking back to the beginning, she spent a lot of money on this thing. Now that she saw it live, how could she not be excited? And the most important thing is that this thing is something that she will use to make money. Since public money was not allowed to eat and drink, the price of long-jawed catfish has been constantly plummeting. From 8,000 yuan per kilogram in 2012, it jumped to 1 or 2,000 yuan. Even some old frozen fish, such as those that have been frozen since 2012, are sold at 4 or 500 yuan per kilogram. However, these fish can't be compared with Jiang Hai's fish. Jiang Hai's fish are live and fresh. They are cultivated by Jiang Hai, and there is spiritual qi in them, although there is very little. Looking at the money, Chile felt that there is gold in front of her eyes. These fish are not ordinary fish, but pure gold bricks. It has to be admitted that Jiang Hai and Chile look at things in the same way, but this thing is still valuable now, but they're not sure how much it is worth. In the end, after studying it, Jiang Hai felt that they should sell it according to the original price. Originally, Jiang Hai's fish were sold at 800 yuan per kilogram, which is 5,500 yuan per kilogram. Now, they will sell it according to the price, but when they sell it, They say that there is a 20% discount for new fish, which is 640 yuan per kilogram. Multiplying it by 6, 9, it is about 4,400 yuan per kilogram. After all, it is live fish, and Jianghai's fish are even wilder than the wild ones. Whether it is the meat quality or the quality, they're all the best. They will try to sell it at this price. If they can accept it, they will raise it later. If they can't accept it, they will lower it again. Anyway, there is a reason, right? As for these things, Qili was very clear about them. Okay, let's do it. How many can you send me? Qili's eyes lit up, and she asked Jianghai. There are a total of 30,000 fish. I can't send them all to you at once. What if they die? How many do you want? Hearing Qili's words, Jianghai knew that she has a way to sell this thing, so he doesn't have to worry about it. Chapter 996. Chunbin was an orthopedic doctor in a hospital in the imperial capital. Although he was not promoted to an assistant lecturer or a principal lecturer, he had studied abroad before and was quite capable. Therefore, although he was not old and had just turned 30 this year, his position in the department was not low. Jianghai had once said that the income of the medical staff in the hospital was very high, and it was the same for Chunbin. For example, in orthopedics, when a bone was broken, they had to use a steel plate. The price of an imported steel plate was actually 500 to 800 renminbi, but the asking price was more than 20,000 to 30,000 renminbi. Moreover, you had to use it. It was equivalent to the most common imported steel plate, and the hospital would earn 19,500 renminbi. The hospital would take half of it and take 10,000 renminbi. The remaining 9,500 renminbi would be taken away by the attending physician. The attending physician would take half of it, and the anesthesiologist, a few nurses, and the like would take the remaining quarter. Therefore, the doctors who could go on stage had a very high income. If they did 2 surgeries a day, they would earn 10,000 renminbi. If they worked 20 days a month and rested for 10 days, that would be 200,000 renminbi. In addition to the medical subsidies for the drugs that could not be reimbursed, which was the money given by the drug dealers, their original salary, and the hospital's bonus. To be honest, if an attending physician in a tertiary grade A hospital did not earn 300,000 renminbi a month, he would be looked down upon by others. 300,000 renminbi a month, and the year-end bonus and so on, he would earn more than 4 million renminbi a year. This was the income of a doctor who could go on stage and had some connections. Most importantly, he was not very busy at all. If it was a big shot in the department, such as the section chief or deputy section chief, they would directly take 50% of the profits that the hospital took. Basically, the section chief would take 5% and the deputy section chief would take 3%. Every hospital was different and the shares were different, but basically they all had it. It did not seem like much, and they would take 500 renminbi for each surgery, but they were taking everyone's share. Most importantly, they also had to go on stage. How did the hospital earn money? That was how they earned it. Don't think that it was expensive. This was the price set by the country. Even if you went all over Huaxia, you would still get the same price. So just wait and see. If a doctor friend complained to you that he was poor, don't believe him. It was all fake. If he managed to become the deputy director, he would be in charge of the construction of the hospital's buildings. His net worth would not be less than 100 million yuan. Chunbin had been assigned to the hospital when he was 27 years old. It had been 5 years since then, and he had been the chief surgeon for 4 years. Other than the first year's salary, he basically did not have any money left. All of it had been given to the higher-ups as a tribute. For the remaining 3 years, he did not leave out a single cent. Although he only drove a car worth 200,000 to 300,000 yuan and lived in a house that was only a few dozen square meters, his parents owned no less than 3 properties in the imperial capital. They were big and small, with school districts and business circles. When he wanted to live in these houses, he could take them back at any time. When he didn't want to live in them, he could rent them out. That would be enough to pay the mortgage. This was their way of survival. However, Chunbin, who was in his 30s, was not married. It was not that he did not want to enjoy married life, but that he had not had enough fun. Everyone was clear about the situation in the country. There were a few majors that were quite open in that aspect. One of them was an art school, the second was a medical school, and the third was a major that trained air stewardesses. The students of these majors were quite open in school, and even more so in work. Jiang Hai's childhood friend, Huang Yunfei, had only been a nurse for a few years. Recently, he said that, not counting the ones he played with outside, he had played with more than 20 young nurses in the hospital. There were even times when he was pushed down in the lounge. Although Chinbin did not play so hard to affect his image, he would not be soft-hearted. Moreover, he was a person who came back from abroad. Today, his target was a newly promoted young nurse. The young nurse was only 19 years old this year. She was assigned to the medical school and looked very innocent. As for whether she was really innocent, it was not clear. Chinbin had asked her out for a long time. Today, he finally asked her out. Needless to say, his goal was to directly get on base. According to Chun Bin's way of playing, for a young girl who had just come out of school, the best way was to directly throw money at her. Of course, you could not directly give her money. That would be asking for trouble. The so-called throwing money at her was to show his charm when using money. For example, when watching a movie, he wanted to book the whole theater. For example, when eating, he wanted to go to the best place. For example, at night, he naturally wanted to go to a high-end hotel. A standard room in a 5-star hotel was only a little more than 1,000 yuan a night. What was so difficult about this? After the first night, if he still wanted to contact her in the future, naturally, it would not be so expensive. However, at that time, women would not be so picky. Everything was difficult at the beginning. Chinbin was also very clear about this point. In the evening, he specially picked up the young nurse after work. Then, they went to eat first. The place they went was none other than the Western restaurant opened by Jiang Hai and Qi Li. At present, these 4 Western restaurants were already synonymous with top-notch Western food and luxury in the capital. Although some people like Xiao did not have the money to eat Jiang Hai's seafood and beef, they were still willing to spend some money to eat ordinary dishes here, such as some Japanese teppanyaki or French set meals. Although it would cost 300 to 400 yuan, it was not something they could not afford. "Mr. Chun, this way, please." After parking the car in the parking lot at the entrance, Chinbin walked into the restaurant with his target. As soon as he walked in, a very beautiful waitress smiled and said to him. Then, she led him to the table he had reserved. As for the girl beside him, it was obviously the first time she had come to this kind of place. Along the way, she looked around in surprise. Qi Li understood the thoughts of Huaxia people very well. Originally, Western restaurants would never put seafood outside, but she did. Moreover, she deliberately put it in the most conspicuous position. As soon as the nurse walked in, she saw the most conspicuous aquarium at first glance. He saw a giant lobster that was more than 1 meter long, a giant grouper that was more than 1 meter long, and 2 fist-sized abalones that were specially placed in the glass tank. The giant king crab was also swimming around. He had to admit that it was actually very shocking. These were live animals that Qi Li had specially obtained from Jiang Hai. It took a lot of effort, so they were indeed quite eye-catching. If a guest at a table ordered these things, the waiter over there would also announce loudly. If a guest at a table ordered these things, the waiter over there would also go and get the lobsters and abalones. It could be said that the waiter was just showing his face. "Wow, Mr. Chun, are those fish real? It's the first time I've seen such big seafood." The young nurse asked Chinbin in a loud voice after he sat down on his seat. Her face was filled with disbelief. "Of course it's real, but we're not here to eat seafood today. Although seafood is not bad, we want to eat better." Hearing the girl's words, Chinbin's vanity exploded. He smiled gently and pointed at the menu in front of him. What are you doing? A steak costs 3,899 yuan? Are you robbing me?" Looking at the food Chinbin ordered, the nurse couldn't help but gasp and said with a look of disbelief. Chinbin was quite satisfied with her reaction. "Miss, our beef is specially imported from Winthrop in the United States. This beef is the best in the world. It has won the first place for beef in the United States, the first place for beef in the United States, the first place for beef in the East, and the first place for beef in Texas. The wholesale and retail price is $400 per kilogram, which is about 2,500 yuan. Because we use pure chilled beef. After the beef is killed, the chilled meat needs to be transported by plane immediately. The time can't exceed 48 hours. In this way, including the transportation fee, it will cost 3,000 yuan, plus the spices we use and the taste of the top French chef's dishes. Plus, this is a set meal that includes a soup, a dessert, a pasta, and a mashed potato. 3,899 yuan is definitely worth it. Obviously, it wasn't the first time the waiter heard this, so he said very professionally, "That's too expensive." Hearing the waiter's words, the nurse here couldn't help but say with some palpitations, "A steak that costs nearly 4,000 yuan. Oh my God, is this beef? Are you sure you didn't just bite into gold? You don't have to worry about this. This morning's beef is indeed the best. I also tasted it when I went to Boston 2 years ago, but after I came back, it was very difficult to come across it. In all of Huaxia, only these 4 restaurants sell it. It's really a pity not to eat it." Looking at the girl's appearance, Chunbin waved his hand and said carelessly. His demeanor really made the nurse a little fascinated in an instant. "Mr. Chun, if this lady doesn't like to eat beef, we specially recommend this fish today." Seeing that the nurse was still a little hesitant, the waiter here also smiled, then opened the menu and pointed to a new page. Hearing the waiter's words, Chunbin couldn't help but take a look at the recommended fish. But just as he looked, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows because he knew this fish. He knew it when he first came back to China. "You have the Yangtze River knife here?" Pointing at the picture on the menu, Chunbin asked with some doubt. "Yes, it's guaranteed to be fresh. It's at the designated spot over there. We just started selling this fish today, and the quantity is really very small. In all of Huaxia, a total of 2,000 fish have been bought. Each restaurant only has 500 fish. Currently, there should only be about 100 left." As the waiter spoke, he checked the iPad in his hand and then showed Chunbin the sales record for tonight. Chunbin took a look. Indeed, from noon to night, there were already more than 100 sales records. While he was looking, another 4 had been sold. What's the price of this thing? Looking at this picture, Chunbin couldn't help but think of the delicacy he tasted a few years ago. He couldn't help but feel a little hungry. Although this fish had a lot of bones, the taste of its meat was extremely rare. This fish is also imported from the United States. I guarantee that it's a wild fish that hasn't eaten any feed. Because it's a new product, the processing is free. According to the calculation of $800 per kilogram, it's $5,500 per kilogram. Because it's a new breed, after a 20% discount, it's $4,400 per kilogram. There are about 4 fish per kilogram, and there are also side dishes. It should be enough for the 2 of you. Looking at the 2 in front of him, the waiter said with a smile. But why did that smile look so fake? Chapter 997. Okay, the green buds are almost gone, and your work for the past few days is also over. Looking at the basket of tea leaves in front of him, Jiang Hai kneaded the tea leaves in the pot and said to Taraga with a smile, "Hey, there's no more work." Although they had only worked for a few days, to be honest, it was very difficult for Pell Celsi and Bessie Oliver to find another job like this. Although picking tea was a little tiring, the salary of $50 per hour was definitely affordable. It was even more than their labor force. Working 10 hours a day was equivalent to $500, which didn't need to be taxed. They had worked here for 5 days, which meant that they had earned $2,500. For a student, this was a huge sum of money. Think about it. If you can earn about $10,000 in 5 days in high school, wouldn't you be crazy? Taraga, take them to get the money. Looking at the 2 girls reluctant to leave, Jiang Hai smiled. At least for now, he doesn't need to pick tea leaves anymore. He only drinks the young buds, and he doesn't drink the ordinary tea leaves. Call us if there's such a good thing next year. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Taraga also took her 2 classmates to the main villa, where Chi Jia will give them money. The premise is that you can't have a boyfriend. Hearing her good friend's words, Taraga said with a chuckle, "Hey, why?" Hearing Taraga's words, Pell Celsi couldn't help but ask with some doubts. Because these tea leaves are Jiang Hai's treasure. There are so many beauties in our manor, Why do we have to pick them up? It's because we are still C. According to Jiang Hai, good tea leaves can't be contaminated with mixed breath, so only we can pick them. Hearing Pel's words, Jiang Hai also said seriously, "Oh, if that's the case, doesn't it mean that we have to keep ourselves chaste for the sake of the $2,500? After hearing Taraga's introduction, Bessie Oliver couldn't help but pat her forehead and said regretfully, "Recently, the main force of the school's basketball team was pursuing her. She was hesitating whether to accept him or not. Now it seemed that it was a bit troublesome. Tisk, do you guys really think that you can mine for the rest of your life? It's already good enough to mine for 3 years. All right, it's time for us to collect our money," Taraga said unhappily as he slapped Belle Oliver. These guys were really dreaming. After being patted by her, the other 2 girls also smiled and followed her into the mansion. Beside them, Delina and Marion were also walking quietly. Although they had worked together for 5 days, they obviously didn't get along well with each other. Delina and Marion had been seriously injured at the beginning. They couldn't get over the trauma that easily. For these people of the same age, they might only be able to play with Taraga because they were really familiar with each other. As for the others, at this time, Jiang Hai didn't know what these girls were studying. He was still stir-frying the tea. Jiang Hai's tea leaves were stir-fried by himself last year. Although his stir-frying wasn't very good, he still had some experience. This year, when he stir-fried them again, it was obvious that he would be able to do a good job. Because Jiang Hai stir-fried tea leaves, he didn't use the original method of stir-frying tea leaves. He used a broom to stir-fry tea leaves. Jiang Hai was afraid that the broom would ruin the image of the tea leaves. Therefore, he used his hands to stir-fry the tea leaves. He also used a very particular technique. Stir-frying must be done in 2 pots. The temperature was different and the method was different. The first pot was basically called a green pot. Its main purpose was to finish the tea leaves. Of course, it was also to remove the first layer of water and let the smell of grass and the fresh leaves volatilize. Generally, tea leaves were directly swept with a broom, but Jiang Hai's tea leaves had to be done by hand. Stir-frying in a 200-degree pot with their hands was really unbearable for most people, but Jiang Hai didn't care. Although he didn't say that he didn't want to avoid the cold and heat, as long as he didn't put his hands in a 200-degree pot, it wasn't a big problem. In order to reduce the water content in the tea leaves from the initial 75% to 25% to 30%, the tea leaves in the green pot had to be spread out flat for an hour. Then, it was placed in the bright pot for the final shape and stir-frying. At this stage, the water content in the tea leaves had to be reduced to 6% to 7%. Then, the tea leaves would be considered finished. There were many techniques for stir-frying tea, such as shaking, mixing, folding, pressing, swinging, grabbing, pushing, buckling, grinding, and pressing. Jiang Hai's current technique was definitely not as good as the master's, but he would put in some spiritual energy when stir-frying. This was something that others couldn't compare to. This year, Jiang Hai had collected about 200 kilograms of tea leaves, which was about 400 kilograms. Based on a calculation that 4 kilograms of tea leaves produced 1 kilogram of tea leaves, he could produce about 100 kilograms. This should be enough for Jiang Hai to drink for a year. By noon, Jiang Hai had already stir-fried about 10 kilograms. After Aphrodite, Qi Jie, and the others finished their work in the greenhouse and vineyard in the morning, they would come over to help him pack the tea leaves. Because Jiang Hai was a little conflicted, they would try their best to pack the best tea leaves. Then, they would seal them with a sealer and put them into a small jar that Jiang Hai had prepared beforehand. They would put it in a large refrigerator that only had a fresh-keeping function. This way, the taste and quality of the tea leaves wouldn't change, and it could be stored for at least a year and a half. However, according to Jiang Hai's habit of drinking tea every day, he probably wouldn't last a year and a half. These 100 kilograms of tea leaves would be enough for him to drink for about a year and 2 months. All right, even if it was only enough for a year, it would be enough for him to last until spring next year. After helping Jiang Hai in the afternoon, the girls went back to their posts around 2 o'clock. There wasn't much to do in the vineyard. Basically, It was just to get rid of insects and observe the vines. Although it was a little boring and dry, it wasn't tiring. The greenhouse and the vegetable garden was about the same. They didn't even need Chi Jie and the others to get rid of insects because there were chickens. These fellows were experts at getting rid of insects. What Chi Jie and the others had to do was to add some seeds and watch the chickens so that the chickens wouldn't destroy the vegetables. Maybe it was because Huaxia's chickens were originally smart, or maybe it was because they ate spiritual energy that they could understand. Jiang Hai's chickens, whether it was the Wolf Mountain chicken or the 9 kilograms yellow chicken, had become a lot smarter. When they first came, they felt that vegetables tasted better than insects. But now, after nearly 2 years, these chickens could pick insects to eat. Of course, they couldn't distinguish between beneficial insects and harmful insects, so they would eat some vegetables, green insects, and budding worms. But they would also eat ladybugs that ate budding worms and earthworms that loosened the soil. Fortunately, there was a lot of earthworms in Jiang Hai's place, probably because they had absorbed too much spiritual energy, so he didn't have to worry about them being eaten up and causing the soil to harden. Speaking of ladybugs here, when Jiang Hai was young, he was taught that ladybugs with 7 stars were beneficial insects. The others were called Big Sister Hua and were harmful. But in fact, only Big Sister Hua was a harmful insect, which was a ladybug with 28 stars. The others, whether they were 7-star, 6-striped, multicolored, turtle-striped, big-shouldered Australian ladybugs, 2-star, 6-star, 7-star, 9-star, 10-star, 12-star, 13-star, 14-star, and so on, were all beneficial insects. In addition to the 28-star ladybugs, only the 11-star ladybugs were harmful. Other than that, the other ladybugs were beneficial. But the chickens couldn't care less about that. They would eat them when they saw them, and Jiang Hai couldn't do anything about it. No matter what, there was basically no problem with the vegetables, and they were all natural and organic vegetables. After the women left, Jiang Hai continued to fry the tea leaves. He could basically fry 20 kilograms of tea leaves a day. After frying today, he would fry the whole morning tomorrow. This year's tea leaves would be finished, so he wasn't very anxious. But just as he was frying here, a slightly unfamiliar car appeared at the gate of Jiang Hai's manor. Then Moses Adams got out of the car in high spirits and shouted at Jiang Hai, who was frying tea in the distance. Seeing him waving there, Jiang Hai also took out the remote control of the gate from his pocket and pressed it. The gate opened, then Moses Adams drove the car and parked in a parking lot in front of Jiang Hai's villa. Then he walked over with a smile. "Oh, what's the good news? You look so happy. And you even changed your car? A Bentley Mulsanne. You're doing well." Seeing Moses Adams coming over, Jiang Hai smiled and said to him. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Moses Adams waved his hand. "Hey, boss, how can my car compare to yours? It's not like you don't know that this car is only $200,000. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also smiled. Indeed, there was a price difference between domestic cars and American cars, and the biggest difference was between Bentley and Rolls-Royce. The difference between Bentley and Rolls-Royce was about 4 times. For example, the car that Moses Adams was driving now was at least $5 million in China, but in the United States, even if it was calculated according to 1 to 7, it was only 1 for million renminbi. The gap was really difficult to understand. For example, in Transformers 3, the Mercedes-Benz Sam driven by the heroine was sold for $6 million in China, but it was still $200,000 in the United States, and that was the price found online. If you buy it, there will be a discount. Who can you find a reason with? Well, if you have something to say, I'm still busy. Grabbing a handful of tea leaves and feeling the moisture in them, Jiang Hai said to Moses Adams. He really didn't have much time now. "Boss, I came to tell you that you have to prepare to pay taxes. We have to calculate how much you can avoid." Chapter 998. Yeah, it's time to pay taxes again. Upon hearing Moses Adams' words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but slap his forehead and say with some emotion. Every year at this time, Jiang Hai felt his heart ache. To be fair, both the United States and Huaxia had their own advantages. If everything was done according to formal laws, there would be no favors, no private acceptance, and so on. China was much better than the United States. Jiang Hai had introduced the taxes in the United States. First, there was a national tax, which was 35% federal tax. Then there was a state tax. The state tax in Massachusetts was not very expensive, but it was not cheap either. It was 5%. There was no local tax, so there was no need to pay. Then there was the property tax and a land tax. These were collected according to the price of the house and the price of the land. Naturally, they were not included in the total value. However, just these two taxes alone were 40%. Fortunately, Jiang Hai did not pay Social Security, pension, and medical insurance here. Otherwise, he would have to pay 8%. The 8% that Jiang Hai earned, he could open many hospitals by himself. Although the land in China doesn't belong to you, the taxes in China are very low. If it's a normal income, it's not a business tax, it's not a lottery. Basically, the tax rate is between 10% and 12%. For example, if Jiang Hai earns 10 billion yuan by raising cattle and fish, then the tax rate would be about 1 billion yuan. However, the land doesn't belong to you, it's leased to you by the state. You only have 60 years of authority. Of course, he had to consider many things. For example, if someone saw that he was making money here, they would use various methods to annex the land. Your land could be directly built on, developed for other things, or directly subleased to others. Otherwise, the villagers would come to your place to steal fish, kill cows, and so on. When the time came and you quit, the people here would directly compensate you at the price of a few hundred yuan per mu. After all, a few hundred yuan per mu was set by the country, and there were laws and regulations. If you quit, you would be a nail in the house. It was hard to predict when the time came, such as forced demolition, beating, and so on. Although he paid 4 times the tax in the United States, at least Jiang Hai did not have to worry about this problem. After stir-frying the tea leaves on hand, Jiang Hai returned to his villa with Moses Adams. There, he took out the computer and calculated his total income last year. Although the United States collected a lot, there would be a tax refund. However, before that, he had to pay all the taxes, and then they would return the taxes after they studied it. Jiang Hai now wanted to study how much he had to pay and how much he could return. He was not a professional accountant, but he had to at least have a rough idea. From April last year to April this year, Jiang Hai's income from beef cattle was $2,584,196,300. Fish was $2,494,304,800. Red wine was $160 million. And grass was $1,784,520,000. The domestic taxes were handled by Qi Li and the country, and had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai only counted the money he earned from his own manor, which was $1,100,000. The 35% of the federal taxes had to be paid, which was $2,488,573,385. However, Jiang Hai could return some taxes. For example, if he raised cattle and fish, the government subsidized 2% for fish seedlings, 2% for grass seedlings, 3% for cattle, and 7% for labor. Because he hired Harriman Fells and Knerson Peters, each of them deducted 1%. In other words, Jiang Hai could get a total of 8% of the money back. The total amount he had to pay was 27%, which was $1,886,225,697. Of course, the original amount had to be paid in full, and then they would return it. In addition to the federal tax, there was also the state tax of 5%, which was $351,151,055. However, because Jiang Hai bought the sea and land last year, the state government said that Jiang Hai would be exempt from the seafood tax for 3 years. In other words, Jiang Hai only had to pay the money from selling cattle, grass, and red wine on land, which was $2,264,435,815. In simple terms, it was $2,100,000,000. To be honest, Jiang Hai was a little speechless when he looked at the money, but there was nothing he could do. He had to pay it, or the American government would have an excuse to take back his things. Compared to this large sum of money, the tax on fishing grounds, land, houses, cars, and the taxes on the planes and ships that Jiang Hai bought were much less. They added up to less than $60 million. In total, Jiang Hai might have to pay $2.2 billion in taxes this year. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai could not help but sigh. This money was really too much to pay. Okay, when you go back, ask a few accountants to calculate it for me. Then I'll go to your place next Monday to pay the taxes. Rubbing his temples, Jiang Hai said somewhat speechlessly. This tax was really annoying. Boss, there's no other way. This is why the United States is so tolerant of capitalists, because they have to rely on you to survive. Hearing what Jiang Hai said, Adams could not help but laugh. Then he immediately contacted the accounting firm to calculate the tax rate clearly, because it was related to Jiang Hai's future. In the evening, after Adams had a meal at Jiang Hai's place, he drove back. He received money for helping Jiang Hai. When he was free, he received a normal salary. When he was busy, Jiang Hai also received a bonus. Since he started working for Jiang Hai, he had received almost $10 million from Jiang Hai, including the money for helping Jiang Hai acquire those companies. Of course, the accounts were clear, but he helped Jiang Hai acquire those companies and then sold them at a high price, so he must also receive a commission. In addition to Jiang Hai's capital, he received 20%. For example, he helped Jiang Hai buy a company for $10 million and sold it for $13 million. 20% of the $3 million was his. Therefore, he really made a lot of money, including the expansion of his company now. These were all inseparable from Jiang Hai's money. It was precisely because of this that, even if it was only for the sake of benefits, he would honestly be Jiang Hai's lackey, because Jiang Hai was too careless. Is there enough money to pay the taxes? You spent a lot of money this year, including the Qi Group's shares and Google's shares. After watching Adams leave, Jiang Hai and the others also went back to rest. Because they were very tired these days, they didn't play any tricks. Today, as usual, 4 girls came to accompany him: Chia, Aphrodite, and Dana. After they finished, Jiang Hai hugged Chia on one side and held Chia on the other. Aphrodite and Dana helped Jiang Hai clean up the battlefield just now. Chia was in Jiang Hai's arms and asked Jiang Hai worriedly. She knew how terrible the IRS was. Don't worry, when have we ever worried about money? Gently kissing Chia's forehead, Jiang Hai said with a smile. He was a person who liked to prepare for the worst. So after buying Google shares last year, he had already prepared for a rainy day. Now he had about $5 billion in cash in the bank. This was all the money he earned by increasing the market volume in the past few months. No matter what, he couldn't be blamed by others because of taxes. Then I'm relieved. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Jia also smiled, then found a comfortable position. After a while, soft snoring sounds could be heard. On the other side, Aphrodite and Dana also finished cleaning up some of Jiang Hai's indescribable places. After brushing their teeth and rinsing their mouthwash, they also came back and fell asleep leaning against Jia and Chia. And Jiang Hai listened to the steady breathing of the 4 girls beside him and gradually fell asleep. The next morning, after he finished frying the last of the tea leaves, he called Chili to ask about the sales of the Yangtze River knife, which was the long-jawed centipede. When he asked about this, Chili was very happy because the effect of this thing was really quite good. Since Jiang Hai shipped the long-jawed centipede to sell, almost 1,700 to 800 of them were sold on the first day. Then, when Chili was originally prepared to welcome a round of low tide, suddenly, 2,000 of them were sold on the second day. If it weren't for the fact that there was no stock, they might have sold more because the Yangtze River knife was indeed a very important food in the eyes of a generation of tycoons. Because they were not allowed to eat and drink with public funds, but if they bought it themselves, no one would have any objections. Therefore, many businessmen would cater to their preferences, give them some, or invite these tycoons to eat at their home. When the time came, no one would care if the Yangtze River knife was served. Therefore, Jiang Hai's Yangtze River knife was being digested even more quickly. Jiang Hai's first batch of 6,000 fish was sold out in 300 days. After learning about this situation, Jiang Hai shipped another 5,000 fish. Now, there were about 80,000 long-jawed centipedes in the river that had finished laying eggs. The pressure of this number was much less than a few days ago, but Jiang Hai knew that these fish would soon feel that the space was getting bigger and bigger because there would be other fish disappearing with them. In this way, another 2 days passed. After a weekend, Jiang Hai had breakfast early this morning. After patrolling his own territory, he drove to Boston because today was the day he paid his taxes. When the car drove out of the manor, Jiang Hai clearly felt that spring was coming. Because Jiang Hai's manor was planted with pasture, there were no trees or flowers. But when he walked outside, Jiang Hai could clearly see that the wildflowers on the roadside had bloomed, and the trees were full of new branches and buds. The breath of spring blew in his face, and it was very pleasant. But halfway through, Jiang Hai suddenly saw a girl riding a bicycle slowly on the road. Chapter 999. Hey Karma, why are you here? The car slowly drove past. Jiang Hai looked at the girl who was listening to music while riding a bicycle and asked with some doubts. They're almost at the airport, far away from Winthrop. Hey Jiang, I'm going to school. Seeing Jiang Hai rolling down the window, Karma said with a smile. School? Today is Monday. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. She seems to have read the calendar wrong. I don't have class today. I just have to get there before dinner. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Karma shrugged and said, Do you want to go quickly? If you want, come on up. If you want to exercise, then you can do it. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai smiled. The freedom of Americans to go to school is far from what Jiang Hai can understand, so he can only curl his lips to show that he understands and ask her at the same time. Obviously, Americans don't love the environment so much. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, she stopped the car directly and then waited for Jiang Hai to stop the car with a smile. She stuffed the bicycle into the back of Jiang Hai's shield and then sat in the front passenger seat. Americans are very conscious. When she sat in the front passenger seat, she fastened her seatbelt. Jiang Hai originally hated fastening this thing the most. He felt a little nervous, but now it has become a habit in the United States. After getting in the car, Jiang Hai fastened his seatbelt, started the engine, and went to Boston. How can the people in your family let you ride a bicycle to school alone? This is a bit too dangerous. Looking at Karma Cliff, Jiang Hai asked her with some doubts. Although the eastern United States is not as uninhabited as the western United States and central United States, it is also a bit dangerous. Even if it is to cultivate the child's independent character, it should not be like this. Hey, I've been riding this road for more than a year, but I used to have a small car, but now I don't have it. Alas, it's a pity that my sister's broken car was scrapped in less than a year. It's not easy to get a new one. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Karma Cliff said with a speechless face. In the United States, it is a normal and common thing for parents to buy a car for their children. Because basically, when a child can graduate from high school successfully, he has already gotten a driver's license. The United States also has an ID card. Just like Huaxia's ID card, there is a chip in it. That is to say, where you go, you can find out with a scan of your ID card. It is no different from Huaxia's feeling. In the eyes of the United States, this is an invasion of privacy, and it is extremely sensitive. More than 90% of the people in the United States are against this law. There are even people demonstrating in front of the Senate to cancel the ID card. However, the United States is extremely sensitive after September 11th, so this is not allowed. Therefore, the people thought of other ways. That is, those who have a driver's license would not bring their ID card. In the United States, if the police stop a person and the person shows his driver's license, it proves that the person is a native. If he shows his ID card, it is estimated that there are some problems or he is a new immigrant. Karma Cliff naturally also has a driver's license, So before going to college, she inherited her sister's car. Originally, SH-20 Clive had a car. Jiang-hai also knew that this car was for her to drive to work. It was also a second-hand car. Later, when SH-20 Clive went to work in town and received a higher salary, he bought a new one. This third-hand car was given to Karma Cliff. But unfortunately, Karma Cliff is not an experienced driver. Women do not particularly know about cars and do not particularly care about them. Therefore, this car has been driven for a year and has just been sold not long ago. Although Karma Cliff wants to buy a new one, even a second-hand one is fine. The problem is that not everyone is like Jiang-hai, who does not care about money. The Clive family still has to wait until after the tax is paid and see how much spare money they have to go to the second-hand market to buy one. I can't help you, but if you want to come back on Sunday, I can give you a call and let you hitch a ride. Hearing Karma Cliff's explanation, Jiang-hai shrugged. If he is her brother-in-law now, let alone a second-hand car, Jiang-hai can even afford a Lamborghini. But the problem is that he is not. Even if he is kind, he will only help him introduce Valentina and the others. After all, they have to come back from Boston every week. One more passenger is probably not a problem. Sai, how good would it be if you were my brother-in-law? Didn't you and my sister have a good chat? Why didn't you write to her? Hearing Jiang-hai's words, Karma Cliff also sighed, then supported her chin and looked at Jiang-hai. You also know the situation in my family. I do have some relationship with the girls in the family, so it is understandable that your sister can't accept it. She made a choice. It's that simple. Hearing Karma Cliff's words, Jiang-hai also knew that he is a scumbag. Since he already has what he wants, there's no need to look at other people's bowls. Even Daliana and Marion. Hearing Jiang-hai admit that he is a scumbag so readily, Karma Cliff asked with some doubts, but hearing her words, Jiang-hai flicked her head. What are you thinking? That is my girl. After being flicked by Jiang-hai, Karma Cliff couldn't help but smile. Jiang-hai is unlikely to be a person who is so desperate, but with her understanding of her sister, there is really no chance. Then the two sat in the car and wisely changed the topic. Jiang-hai asked her how her life in university was, and she also asked about the situation in Jiang-hai's manner. Last time she stopped Jiang-hai, she originally wanted to ask Jiang-hai if she could take her friends to Jiang-hai's beach for a party, but she was stopped by her sister. Jiang-hai didn't care about this. If she wanted to come and play, then it was impossible for Jiang-hai to disagree. But if she didn't come, Jiang-hai wouldn't invite her. This is his character. The two chatted and laughed, and it didn't take long for them to arrive in Boston. After sending Karma Karev to the gate of her school, Jiang-hai drove directly to the IRS. People like Jiang-hai naturally received The deputy director here personally received Jiang-hai, and after Jiang-hai handed over the tax report and evaluation slip, he also paid all the taxes in one go. These were all recorded in the account, and after that, the refund would also be transferred to Jiang-hai's card. The tax issue, which would have been troublesome for others, was easily solved by Jiang-hai. There was no other way. In Massachusetts, Jiang-hai was a very important person. Even if he was exempted from the fishing tax for 3 years, Jiang-hai still paid more than $200 million. Although this was not a large sum of money for the entire state, it was definitely not a small sum. At present, the GDP of the entire state of Massachusetts was about $300 billion. If the tax was collected at 5%, it would be $15 billion in total. There were nearly 7 million people in the state, and each person's average income was more than $2,000. Jiang-hai was now more than $200 million, which was 100,000 times more than others. Naturally, Jiang-hai was a well-deserved big user. After happily paying the money and receiving the tax assessment certificate, Jiang-hai left. Although it was done quickly, it still took him more than an hour or two. When he walked out, he looked at his Patek Philippe. It was already 11:15. Looking at the sky, it was just noon. Jiang-hai originally planned to go to the Tunglong Company in the afternoon to take a look, but now it was lunch break. If he went there, he would disturb them. So, Jiang-hai planned to solve the problem himself and go to the company at 1:30 in the afternoon. At that time, everyone would be back to work, and he could also check it out. But what to eat was a problem. Thinking about it, Jiang Hai suddenly looked back at his tea leaves. Since he didn't know what to eat, he would go to the company for a meal. Anyway, this time, he was on a visit old Master Zhang Di Hai. When he first came here, he took care of Jiang Hai a lot and also extorted a lot of tea leaves from him. Now that his tea leaves were fried, he naturally wanted to give some to the old man. If there were too many, it was impossible to fill his stomach, but Jiang Hai could still give a can of half a caddy. Thinking of this, he also got in the car and went to the supermarket where old Master Zhang usually stayed. When his car arrived here, he found that old Master Zhang's shop was surrounded by a group of gangsters. Old Master Zhang was pointing at a man with a trembling right hand, cursing something, but that person didn't care at all. Seeing this, Jiang Hai frowned. He was a very protective person, especially in Boston. No one dared to not give him face. Moreover, old Master Zhang's power was not small. How could there be gangsters who didn't open their eyes to trouble him? So thinking of this, Jiang Hai directly drove the car over. Seeing a car about to rush over, these gangsters immediately got out of the way. Of course, they were also cursing, but looking at this car, it seemed to be quite luxurious, and most importantly, they were in front of the sea market. They didn't dare to do anything other than curse. At this time, Jiang Hai also got out of the car and looked at these gangsters. With a glance, he knew that these guys didn't have guns. Without guns, would Jiang Hai be afraid of them? What a joke. Directly following the path these people made, Jiang Hai walked into the supermarket and asked Zhang Di Hai, "Uncle Zhang, what's the situation?" Chapter 1000. Hey, little Jiang, why are you here? Looking at Jiang Hai who came in, Zhang Di Hai couldn't help but say helplessly. The anger on his face was reluctantly pulled up into a smile. "My tea is ready, so I sent some over to you. What's the situation?" Looking at the gangsters around him who were ready to fight, Jiang Hai frowned. It shouldn't be a malicious incident. After all, the Sea Commercial Supermarket also has some influence in the United States. It is a member of the largest wave of Chinese supermarkets. These people dare to provoke them? It's impossible. AI, my family is unfortunate. Hearing Jiang Hai's inquiry, Zhang Di Hai couldn't help but sigh. He signaled a little girl behind him to take the tea in Jiang Hai's hand and said to Jiang Hai somewhat speechlessly. Jiang Hai had also seen this little girl before. Her name was Zhang Qian. She was the granddaughter of old Master Zhang. He hadn't seen her for a few years. She had grown up a little and was not so afraid of strangers. "Old Master, have you thought about it? If you haven't thought about it, you still have to take care of us." Jiang Hai coming in was just an exception. Some of these gangsters had also heard of Jiang Hai. Perhaps they were ruthless, black-hearted, and seeking wealth and danger, but they knew that Jiang Hai was in Boston, so they couldn't touch him. Under such circumstances, these gangsters had to be a lot more honest, but the guy who looked like a skeleton was still clamoring there. "You say," looking at this person's arrogant appearance, Jiang Hai frowned. He couldn't stand others being arrogant in front of him, so he wanted to stand up without saying anything. But before he stood up, he was pulled by Zhang Qian behind him, and then she shook her head gently. Seeing that she told him not to stand up, Jiang Hai had nothing to say, so he stood aside and watched the situation on the field. After hearing this person's clamor, old Master Zhang Di Hai was completely angry. "Bastard, even if I die, you won't get a penny from me. Get out of here." As he roared, old Master Zhang Di Hai didn't know where his strength came from. He directly grabbed the discounted canned food from the supermarket next to him and threw it at the people in front of him. Canned food, that kind of canned meat, was made with metal boxes, and its power was not small. In an instant, a box was thrown on the head of the guy in the lead. Without saying a word, it directly hit the head of this person, and these people didn't dare to resist. They held their heads and ran away. Just as Jiang Hai thought, Haishang Supermarket was far from an ordinary small supermarket. These punks didn't dare to come and find trouble. Now that they were beaten, they could only hold their heads and run away quickly. But they had the intention to fight back. Soon, they ran 10 meters away. With old Master Zhang's strength, he couldn't throw them there. "I tell you, this is not over. I will be back." Looking at Zhang Dihai in the distance, the very thin Hua Xia shouted loudly, then covered his head and ran away quickly. Seeing this scene, Zhang Dihai couldn't help but sigh. I'll let you see a joke. Thank you very much, little Jiang. Please remember this, old man. After turning around helplessly and seeing Jiang Hai behind him, Zhang Dihai couldn't help but smile bitterly, then said to Jiang Hai, "It's nothing. This is also produced by my manner. It's not a good thing." Hearing the old man's words, Jiang Hai also waved his hand and said with a smile, but after the old man heard Jiang Hai's words, he also smiled. What your manner produces is the good stuff, especially your tea leaves and your chickens and pork. If possible, I'll buy as much as you want to sell. I'll buy it at 10 times the market price. Are you willing to sell it? Looking at Jiang Hai's polite words, old Master Zhang couldn't help but laugh, and then said to Jiang Hai, but Jiang Hai couldn't accept this. He wasn't going to sell those things. It just so happens that Zhong Hang is here. Are you here to freeload? Let's go. I'll take you to a good restaurant. Seeing Jiang Hai smile without saying anything, Zhang Dihai also smiled, and then pulled Jiang Hai outside. This supermarket had its own store manager. He was only here as a lookout and did not interfere with the work, so it didn't matter if he left or not. After seeing her grandfather leave, the girl Zhang Qian also walked out with Jiang Hai. This okay. Originally, when Jiang Hai saw that old Master Zhang had an accident here today, he didn't have the intention to freeload, but now that old Master Zhang mentioned it, he couldn't refuse, so he followed him forward. Although Boston used to be a gathering place for white supremacists, and now the KKK still had a lot of influence here, there were a lot of Chinese in Boston, probably because it was the city of education. However, during the great development of the Western United States, the number of Chinese laborers who were sold as pigs here was not particularly large. On the contrary, in recent decades, there had been a lot of immigration. A large part of these families came here to accompany their children in their studies. There was an old saying in Huaxia, no matter how hard it was, the child couldn't suffer. No matter how poor it was, the education couldn't be poor. In addition, in recent years, Huaxia implemented the one-child policy, which made many families only have one child. In order to let their children receive the best education, those rich families naturally had to find ways to let their children go to good schools. The best elementary school, the best junior high school, the best high school, and after graduating from high school, they had to go to university. Which university was the best? Boston. Therefore, in order to prevent their children from being bullied outside, many families who spoiled their children moved here and started to go to university. After coming over, it was easy for the children to get a visa to go to university. However, the parents couldn't. Therefore, these people began to look for jobs here. Those who were skilled started their own companies because the people who came here were basically from wealthy families. There were also some people who opened restaurants. The restaurant that Jiang Hai and the others went to was one of them. The original owner of this restaurant was a top chef in the country. How much money can a top chef make in the country? It was very scary. At least the money he earned a year was not a problem for him to immigrate to the United States. What's more, he opened a restaurant and solved the employment problem of many people. Naturally, the United States welcomed him. Old Man Zhang seemed to be a regular here. After entering the restaurant, the boss personally greeted him with a smile. After a few polite words, the boss personally went to the kitchen to cook. Naturally, the dishes were what Jiang Hai liked to eat, such as double-cooked pork slices, shredded potato slices, green potato slices, and a large bowl of winter-melon pork rib soup. Jiang Hai picked up a piece of double-fried pork first and couldn't help but squint his eyes. This chef's skills were really good. Without changing the sweet and sour taste that foreigners like to eat, the outside was fried crispy, but not hard, and the meat inside was plump and juicy. The taste was quite good, even better than Chiya's. Jiang Hai was very happy. Picking up his chopsticks, he didn't hold back and started eating like a whirlwind. After a while, 2 big bowls of rice were finished. Jiang Hai patted his stomach with satisfaction, indicating that he was very happy to eat. Old Zhang was still there, sipping his wine. Looking at old Master Zhang, Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment, but still couldn't hold back his curiosity and asked him, "Old master, although I don't know what happened just now, if it's possible, tell me. What do you need my help with? I can help you." Alas, the family is unfortunate. Hearing Jiang Hai's question, old Master Zhang might really need someone to talk to. So after hesitating for a moment, he told Jiang Hai. Old Master Zhang had a total of 3 sons. The eldest son was named Zhang Liangwan, and the second son was named Zhang Liangkai. Well, he had the same name as someone in China, but the difference was not ordinary. Zhang Qian was Zhang Liangsai's daughter, and he had another son named Zhang Liangwu. He was the tall and thin man that Jiang Hai saw just now. Originally, old Master Zhang hoped that this guy could train until he was strong, so that he could be proficient in both the pen and the sword and protect the Zhang family. However, this guy did indeed train in martial arts, but as he trained, he went astray. Perhaps it was because of his name, but Zhang Liangwu had some violent tendencies since he was young. He liked to fight when he was in school. Originally, this was nothing but when he was in junior high school, he was abducted by the bad kids in society. Zhang Dihai disciplined him, but he didn't listen. When he hit him, he dared to fight back and even ran away from home. During the 3 years of junior high school, he finally got over it. However, when he was in senior high school, he ran away from home, saying that he wanted to fight for his dream. He stole $10,000 from his family, and when he came back 3 months later, he didn't have a penny and was addicted to drugs, but he didn't care at all. He always thought that he was a big shot, that he had a status in society, and that he was a gangster. Everyone who saw him had to call him master and give him some face. Zhang Dihai was almost mad at his son, but it was useless. He was like this. Once a person learned bad things, there was no way to change for the better. Every 2 or 3 days, he would sneak out a fight and take drugs. Every week, Zhang Dihai would go to the police station to arrest him. When he was 25 years old, Zhang Dihai saw that he really didn't improve at all. So, Zhang Dihai cut off the father and son relationship with him and kicked him out of the house. This person was really shameless. Not only did he continue to hang around outside, but he also used his identity to extort money and steal things from Shanghai supermarkets. Zhang Dihai couldn't stand it anymore. He wanted to teach him a lesson, so he prosecuted him for theft and put him in prison for 5 years. After that, Zhang Dihai was really disappointed with that place, so 5 years ago, he came to Boston to live with his second son. However, he didn't expect this guy to come to Boston as soon as he was released this year. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.